And boom. What's up, everybody? This is KARAK with ACG, and I'm here with Johnny and just Johnny for the best gaming podcast number 455. 455 podcasts of game and fun. Have you had a good week?
Pretty good, actually. Got some stuff done. And also, we have like a sequence of days off. So we had like Monday off. Mm-hmm. We have... I think next Friday off and like a bunch of days off coming, so it's pretty
feels
chill.
Good to get those, like sit back and get those days and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we were talking about vacation yesterday, and I was like, vacation to me is walking out to my deck and playing with my dogs. But my wife's version of a vacation is usually going somewhere. And we were laughing, going like, yeah. And what's good is she plans and I don't. So she'll be like, okay, we're gonna do this, and then she'll put it together, and I get drug.
Okay.
To wherever we're going, and that actually works quite well because if that hadn't happened, I probably, to me a vacation is like
travel,
a nice, yeah.
Is she like a big itinerary person? Like, hey, listen, here's our schedule.
No, but
for
I am
the next,
and that's
6 hours.
That's what sucks is because once we start traveling, I'm the guy I'm like, it'll take us this long to get here. It'll take, like we need to spend this amount of time. Yeah, yeah. What have you been playing, by the way?
Okay, Final Fantasy VII, and today a little bit of Dragon's Dogma.
Have you finished 7?
Play a couple hours. No, I got to chapter 12 where the world fully opens up.
Yeah,
and I was kind of waiting until that point because there were a few like loose ends in prior areas, and I figured that when I hit that point of being a little bit tired of doing open world stuff, I just continued with the story, thinking I'll come back later, right? Mm-hmm. And that will be, it will be fresh because it will be going back to a prior area.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It does open up to a point to where, I don't know about you, but I spent about 9 hours just in the grasslands. Actually, more than that. I think I spent like 15 in that first section, and then you get later on, and even more opens up, and you're like, oh my God, this game is huge. I don't think that was probably, I don't think that was reflected enough in reviews, including my own, where maybe the idea of just how big it could be, because you can still finish it in what is quite a normal time frame. But the actual game is massive.
Yeah, it's ginormous, dude.
Yeah. Maybe that's why it's so blurry. I don't know.
It's kind of layered too, because when it does open up fully like that, it also adds more quests, and some of them are like chained. So, to do this one here, you have to go to these other 2 places, get something there, come back.
Yeah. It's awesome. And let's talk about world design in a bit on it too. So I was asking people what they got. It looks like Rise of Ronin just saw is Bitlarus. He got just saw Rise of Ronin DD2. Unicorn
it's one of those
Overlord.
Nice moments where everybody's coming together, like for one game, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because Horizon Rise is exclusive, but admittedly for some people, especially if they're a PlayStation fan or that's all they've got or what have you, then they can jump on that, that kind of stuff. There's definitely a time where everybody's coming together. It's actually pretty cool because even if, we're going to talk about like mistakes companies are making, you're still looking at like a time where there's 3 or 4 big titles and then a bunch of indies. Somebody on Twitter, we were talking about the Capcom stuff, and somebody on Twitter was saying the Balatro or whatever game. And how much they liked that. And that's just an indie game that came out of nowhere that's about poker roguelike. Like, what the hell? Who would have... Like, I don't know why, but that game is so weird to me. Because it doesn't look great. It looks like poker in and of itself. And so I'm like, what? Why is everybody like this so much? But then you talk to people who play it, and they're like, this is fantastic. Some people doing DD1, Forbidden West, DD2. Somebody wants an OnlyFans for me. Ain't gonna happen. Sorry. Let's see. DD2, Stellar Blade. DD2, Aloy.
Is Stellar Blade out?
I'm assuming.
Demo,
they said I
maybe?
need it to be good. They say I need it to be good.
Oh, gotcha.
I appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you very much, Frankie, for the membership. Somebody got.
Hey.
And then DD2. Somebody's playing Dark Arisen. And that's it. A lot of DD2. Yeah,
so that's my feeling, is that everybody kind of stopped what they were doing to play Dragon's Dogma 2, whether, because it's everywhere. So whatever console you're on. And that's cool to me. That's almost like an Elden Ring thing where even, FIFA gamers who only play FIFA, they're like, I'm going to give that a try,
Yeah, I would say that it is also what we were talking about earlier, a sign of it's a sign of people looking forward to stuff, but it's also, I've always felt this whenever everybody comes together, it's also the sign of if there's issues, that'll be the one you hear about. And it certainly is with Dragon's Dogma. Like you hear that let me look this up. In fact, Capcom's statement on DD2. So people were asking me if we knew about microtransactions in a Capcom game. First, yes, of course, there was a store button. But what was weird was, and I think I can say this without any real issue, you were told to be offline, private on everything. So being offline means when you hit the store, nothing happens. There is a link in the PR document, and admittedly it's there, and everybody knows if you followed me, whether it be Rage 2, where I bitched because there was a gap in the menu, and I was like, there's a store right there. I want to see it up front. Like, I don't have as much of an issue if I can see it up front. But this one definitely was missed by a lot of people, purely even knowing there was a store, which is weird because it is in the
menu.
What do you call it? But when you look at it, it's definitely something that was missed. Like, it's something that should have been talked about, especially because what then was created was the idea that people thought it was ruining the game or that it was different from Dragon's Dogma 1, which it's not. The Dragon's Dogma 1 gameplay in 2 is the same, whether it be the fast travel, blah, blah, blah. And they sell items, but because most people didn't cover it, nobody was able to say, does it affect the game? Which is something that I cover in all games anyway. So, and I didn't either. Like, I just, once I saw the store, I was like, okay, it'll be a Resident Evil thing. That's what I assume. Resident Evil,
also,
more Monster Hunter,
offline,
I guess. But
you couldn't see the store itself.
That's
like
on me,
what's
though.
in the store, right?
Yeah, but that's on, I should have just, I mean, most of the time I'll sneak in, but I sort of knew what a Capcom game would have. And they're exactly what I expected. But I do get why people are like, hey, dudes, this wasn't covered. Here's the other issue. It's not just the microtransactions. This is what bothers me is people are like, it's not just that microtransactions are in something. It's how they're used. Do they cycle through the game? Do they change the gameplay? And do they, you and I've talked about it. If you can adjust the experience just a little bit to where somebody goes, hey, for $1.99, I'll buy some experience packs in Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed's a good example. They sell experience packs. Nothing like that's sold in Dragon's Dogma. It's like the fast travel stone and stuff like that. But you can get all those quite easily in the game. In fact, that's sort of what I was saying in the Wednesday podcast was that I was sort of, I'm not going to say disappointed you get them so easy, but because there's so much money and a counterfeiter, which I hinted at Wednesday, but I wasn't sure exactly if we could talk about the counterfeiter. But just like the Black Cat in number 1, a couple weeks ago, I was talking about the Black Cat who's in number 1. You can go to them and you can have them counterfeit an item, which includes all items. So you can have them counterfeit stuff if you can't find it some way. So like if there's a disguise kit, you can go to the counterfeiter, have them, blah, blah, blah. But those are there. They're in there. What's the big problem is it's spread out. It's not just that they're there, it's that there was no explanation. And then a lot of people are coming. This is something that even I should be clear on. I'm always joking with you guys and saying people are having sex, so new people are coming into games all the time.
Yeah.
When it comes to Dragon's Dogma, just because I knew, it's like, oh, you know what? A new person's not going to know that fast travel is there in a way with the ox carts and stuff, because you can still travel everywhere with the ox carts, which I did point out in the review. But yeah, it's just one of those things that pops up, and they have their performance issues too that we talked about in the review with the city in particular. Is just what's weird though, and I don't know how this is possible, but we had 40 people streaming it in the Discord. They all had better FPS than I did, and I don't know if there's a patch that I'm unaware of. But I was watching people playing it, going, "What the shit?" Now, did they have FPS issues in the city? Yes, but I don't know what's going on, because even on my more powerful system, I was watching Frankie Donuts playing. That dude's getting like in city, getting like 70, 80 FPS. And I'm looking at mine going, how's it getting 70 or 80 FPS? I mean, some places in the city you might, but when CPU cycles overlap and AI overlaps. But
interesting.
For what Capcom said, so that people know what we're talking about, I apologize, is that so there were microtransactions. We know about the tech issues, but Capcom has issued a statement that states, we'd like to update on the status of the following items about which we've received numerous comments by the community. And that's the items that are there in the DLC. They can all be got in-game, so be aware of that. But you have Art of Metamorphosis, Rift Incense, Port Crystals, Wake Stones, crystals themselves, makeshift keys to open things, and smoke beacons to lure harpies. Those are all obtained in-game, but you can get them. This is like Monster Hunter or Assassin's Creed, where they sell something that you can get. But that is the difference here, is that Dragon's Dogma in particular is difficult, or more difficult than normal, to fast travel. So people are worried that, will that cause me to purchase something? Which I get. I got to be honest, guys, it's Capcom. I don't know of anybody who didn't expect Capcom to have a microtransaction day one. That's what they do. But admittedly, this is a different style of game than Monster Hunter, I think. So there's some worry there. And then they also addressed PC performance issues and reiterated the warning about it putting CPUs under extreme pressure. It is extreme. It is extreme. It is a CPU bound game. It for sure is a CPU bound game. So
it's so funny too, because I entered a couple towns so far at the very beginning, but they are so like small, like they're like 3 people in in some of these early towns.
Yeah, it definitely has an issue. I think one other thing that people probably are noticing is that it has an issue in one city that you only are in for a small amount of time and then you move on from there. So Osmond says, ACG, come on, man. You could have and should have covered it. I just said that. Dude, literally just said that. Listen, I for sure literally just said that. It absolutely should have been something that was covered more, because it is known, but I should have said it is known. I didn't look at the store. But I think that when you look at it, another one that's big is that Dragon's Dogma has always been harsh on multiple saves. And a big problem right now is you cannot, well, if you wanted to do this, but you couldn't, let's say, play for 5 hours and easily hit start a new save and it deletes. You have to actually manually delete your save, which is odd.
So you can't have multiple characters.
You've never been able to, but you can, at least I don't think, but you can't easily just hit new game and have it be like pop, and here's the thing, you have to go in and delete. So people have to share that on Steam, which sucks. Because I think a lot of people
expected the Dark Souls thing where, they have Joe Bob 1 and Joe Bob 2 and these just different slots. Yeah,
it's really, it's something that not everybody's going to do, but it's something that's pretty generically normal. Like, I don't know of many games that don't let you hit new game and start a new game. And a lot of people are going to go in and they're going to be a warrior and decide they don't want to be a warrior, they want to be a fighter. And the vocation trainer is pretty early, so you can change vocations, so they're not going to run into it. But for anybody who wants, let's say you make a pawn that you don't like, you make a main character that you don't like, you're going to be sort of screwed, because you're going to make a main character that you don't like, and you're going to be like, do I wait, save money, and get this thing to transform myself in-game, or do I want to reset the entire thing? And I mean, I don't know of another game that doesn't let you do this. Like, it just seems weird to me. And Straight Shot says something. The game tells you only to trust saves at the inn. It's the only way to save properly. Yeah, I found that weird too. I didn't have any issues. I did save outside of the inns multiple times, but they do have this warning that some people are wondering if it was fiction. Like, are they trying to say that something can go bad?
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it's odd, and it shouldn't be done. Yeah, it shouldn't be done. That shouldn't be done. Does it stop me from having fun in the game? No, it does not.
Yeah.
So all of this stuff is real complaints, valid complaints, but it's like, when it comes down to it, it's still an absolute blast to play. I think the big problem is we talked about this last week, talked about it the week prior, where I was like, these companies had this Griffin gaming survey, and you brought it up, thankfully reminded me, had this big survey where they know what causes people angst. and performance is one of them. But on top of performance, if you start adding all this other stupid shit, you are hampered. Are they doing insanely well? Yes. It's like the #1 game they've ever released concurrent. Like, they're doing well. But what would it be? We've talked about this, man. If you fuck up that first initial impression, how do you get it back? And I'm tired of hearing about No Man's Skies. To me, again, I enjoy this game way more than No Man's Sky or those kind of things. But if a gamer plays this, they get bad performance. They have a save game corrupt. Now, I've had save games corrupt on a lot of games. That does suck. But in this, where you can't have multiple saves, it double sucks because it's like now you're doubly screwed. Yeah. $5 from Kenster. My friend Jaden plays Dragon's Dogma 2 while blasting Hot Rockin' by Judas Priest and sweating profusely. He says it pumps him up. All right.
Why is he sweating though?
I don't know. I played the game with the audio on. Peter, $2 super camp or super chat. He says Explorer Camp can't be without DLC. It weighs less. I have camps though. Oh, is that a particular type of camp? Oh, interesting. So it's a camp that why would you care about they are heavy. So that's a weird one right there. So you can get the camps normally in the game, but it weighs less, I guess.
So that's a small advantage.
Yeah, that's pretty stupid though on their part. That's a stupid one. Scott says $5. It's odd that people are upset about PC microtransactions when trainers and mods will be out tonight and does all that. See, this is the thing, guys. It's for sure an issue, minimum, because you're adding the performance and all that. Then it's an issue because there's expectations from some that there'll be micros right away. I think most when it comes to Capcom. But the big problem is that if you have an Explorer Camp kind of thing, I don't like that. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, if you have something that behaves differently in game.
Yes. Yeah.
Because
it's
of
one
the version
thing, but
you
it
bought
still is like.
Yeah, it's a small thing, but that does irk me a bit. And also the only online, I don't know if you saw, but it looks like it's online only. I had a friend trying to play offline and it didn't let him.
You can certainly go private or offline because we did during the review. Yeah. So you're saying he couldn't play it offline at all?
No.
Oh, maybe private versus offline mode versus offline completely.
Yeah, because you see what happened is we have a family thing on Steam with a friend. So, initially she was trying to play the game through us, so she didn't have to buy it. But that only works if, let's say, for example, myself, I own the game. If I'm offline in Steam, she can play at the same time. But if I'm online, then she can't open the same game that I'm on. Does that make sense?
Right, but that's different than offline mode, which lets you play without a server connection of any kind. Are you saying it's that? I don't think it is.
No, I guess I was saying being offline in Steam. Yeah, it doesn't let you while being offline in Steam.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah.
Which, you're right. That is a different thing.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, and guys, be nice to each other. I see people like calling each other names. Call me names. I don't give a shit. But when it comes down to it, I think it definitely is something that, especially somebody like me, if somebody expected me to cover it, you should, because I have no issue covering it and still liking a game as long as it doesn't affect things. And if I had known about the Explorer Camp, I would have been like, this one thing is odd, but is the game still fun? Yeah, it's still fun. FPS issues, is the game still fun? But when you have all of this, it's just, it's one of those things where it's like you look at it and you're like, all right, there's definitely some issues here. There's a ton of people liking it, and I'm not going to ruin their love for it. They're having a good time. I mean, our entire group is in there playing, and they're not having the FPS issues I had. Their Xbox version is, I don't even know how that's working, but one of the guys is playing the Xbox, Jay, and I'm just watching his Xbox going, how is his Xbox version smoother than mine? So there might be an update that came with the retail that I wasn't able to experience. But no, you should expect coverage in reviews of what's in the stores and stuff like that, especially in games where there is something long or hard, like something that is a part of the gameplay that's difficult. Yes, it's in Dragon's Dogma 1, it's identical, but when a microtransaction's added on top of it, what should be said is it plays completely normally, but if you want to do it, you can buy this. And then people can take that as either a negative or a positive. I know some people are dead set against micros, but we're past that. Those are happening. So it's difficult to know. But absolutely, you should expect that from me personally. Like, I definitely want to cover those things because I think people think you want to hide it. It's like, no, you'd rather say it. That way, you don't have people coming at you.
But I've also had the flip side, which is people, leaning so heavily into the, talking about the microtransactions to the point where they were saying incorrect stuff. Like, for example, that you can't change your appearance without paying like $2 or whatever. And that's incorrect. That's untrue. That's completely there's an item in game that you can get to change your appearance. And sure, you can buy, I think, like another instance of it.
Right.
And just like the traveling, that doesn't mean that traveling costs you real money. That means you can buy more if you want to. And it also means that the game is designed around not fast traveling, pretty much, and making that a pretty scarce.
Yeah. You can save in this and you can aux card it. But the big problem is when they're not talked about. This is why when I was doing the review for Rage 2, it was one of the things I'd mentioned was that gap in the menu. I was like, something's wrong with the game. There's a gap, and there's no reason for the menu to have a gap, and that's because the store was hidden. This store was not hidden. It said store, but it's like then you have to go into explaining it, which should definitely have happened more from all of us. I mean, that's something I will also say, not ever in the entire game have I ever used the microtransactions or needed them. They're not needed whatsoever.
Yeah.
But when you have an Explorer thing, and then you have FPS issues on top, and then we've heard people having corrupted saves, it's too much on one thing. It's too many things that it's like, fuck, And we have people that know it, so they're like, okay, I know these things, and now I'm going to jump in. But then you also have, as somebody just mentioned, de novo, which people are worried, and we've seen de novo not impact frame rates, but I absolutely know, I've reviewed games where the cracked version comes out, 6 months later, whatever, and you're seeing people play that, and you're like, okay, that not like 8,000 frames difference, but you're like, there's definitely less checks going on. But DRM's also a thing. I wish de novo wasn't a thing. De novo in particular is like problematic for some games. I think when I reviewed the original Lords of the Fallen, the version that was the original, I'm pretty sure that had de novo high. And I remember playing it and being like, whoa, this thing is a mess. It's stuttery, blah, blah, blah. And then later it either came out without it, or maybe it was even the console versions, which might have not
still had a bit of it. Not really the stutters as much, but certainly performance.
Right.
Not
Tower Dragon.
Like what it should
I apologize. Yeah, not looking the way it should have for the for what you
what's
had
on screen.
Yeah. Tower Dragon, $5 super chat. Having fun with DD2 on PS5 so far. The frame rate's lower in towns, but seems to run decent. G Glue says this is what happens when reviewers rush reviews. It is not. The reviewers had this for a long time. It is literally, I think, a mismatch in expectations, and it should be addressed. Like I will certainly make sure the next time when I hit store and it doesn't connect, I go and look. That's on me.
But I think it also goes to show that it's not something that occurred to you. Like when you were playing it, it's not that you thought, oh, this seems a bit too grindy. Maybe are the microtransactions going to make it better?
Oh, no, I didn't think
it's not something that occurred, right? Because it just sounds like you played it, you had a lot of fun. And
I don't, but it doesn't matter. It cover information's knowledge.
Sure,
and information is pre-warning. So if you can say this is the issue, including myself, if you say this is the issue, which I've done in other games. So like whenever anybody's mad, I saw somebody yesterday who DM'd me and they're like, I like all your stuff, but you didn't cover it on this, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't Dragon's Dogma. It was something else. I was like, you know what? That's absolutely right. As the years go by, slightly change the way I say things. It wasn't related to micros. But I was like, oh yeah, I'll add that back in. I'll try to make sure that information's back in. Store stuff, if you know about it, should be talked about. And it
Fair enough.
Because you can say that is not a thing. And I also feel that if you can say that and still say it's good, that's sort of what matters. And as somebody
And
who takes it
that's
super
in and of
serious,
itself-
I get why people would be mad.
Yeah, that in and of itself is also a good data point for the review in terms of, it didn't occur to you that microtransactions would be needed.
That's what would have
right?
popped up. It's one of those things where they have so many problems and so many different consumers that I try to cover everything. We did have a allotted amount of time you could talk and show video, so 20 minutes or less. But I felt that 20 minutes wasn't a restriction for me. I think reviews 15 to 20 is probably your max. Once you say it's sort of bloviating when you get beyond that. But here could have easily been like, oh, and by the way, there's micros, but this, which I've done with Assassin's Creed games and stuff like that. It's just, on this one, especially with that store,
I think that's good
being
feedback.
Told to turn off.
But also like being realistic, I think what you're doing now, which is like owning up to it, that's the best we can do as people.
It is,
we'll
but
take the feedback, we'll learn from it,
yeah,
right? And
I just feel that the microtransactions are what people are talking about. But the honest truth, to me, is the microtransactions are the smallest thing that's the issue in this. It is the performance. It is the lack of a new save game. Those two things are real things. Performance in particular is a real thing. Like it, as in, you can't buy your way out of performance. I mean, you can buy a new, what I mean is there's no store item that says extra FPS if there ever is. I don't know what we're going to do. But yeah, it's something that absolutely needs to be like held accountable for. And especially when you're getting a bunch, there's no like real excuse for not covering any part, whether it be performance, music, sound, voice. Whenever you're trying to cover the game, you really should be covering every part, and it's difficult, especially when I look at something like a game where it's built around this kind of stuff. I guess it reminds me a little bit of Dark Souls. So if Dark Souls or Elden Ring, remember Elden Ring patched and had horrendous, I had to change the review because of the performance.
Like first patch.
Yeah, the first patch made it terrible. And if they, let's say a game like Dark Souls or Elden Ring had quick bonfires, I don't know what to say. I don't know what the MTX would be. And maybe maybe these exist in those kind of games. If they existed day one, you definitely have to look at them and say, did the developer adjust the game to make it so that you want to use those? Luckily, with this game, all that stuff is available right at the start or very close to the start. But it's still not being able to know that is going to be bothersome to people. And not being able to save, not being able to start a new character is weird. Like, I don't play that way, but I certainly see why anybody out there would be like, dude, I don't want two characters. That's fine. Two characters isn't as a big of a deal. It's the ability to start a new one that's not there that you're like,
and control your save as well. Like, just, because I think it's like an online,
cloud save, maybe.
Yeah, like you don't have it, and you can't really manipulate it or have different save slots or anything. I think for those big games, you always want save slots, even if it's just one character, because so many things can go wrong. A script could go off or not go off, and then you need to restart a quest.
Yeah. Going to super chats real quick. SBZ says DRM issues. Is this some sort of master race joke? It isn't, because DRM can show up on the console versions and eat up their CPUs as well. I don't know of one that we've tracked that has that, but I do know that when you go to Denuvo's website, it says console or platform across all platforms, so they can obviously do it on the consoles. Jemmy5404, $5. Thanks for the content, boys. Luckily, DD2 has been working well for me. I run a 1080 Ti and 8 gigabytes RAM and get 40 to 50 frames and no crashes. That is definitely happening a lot. I will say that the performance I'm seeing is actually better than my performance, which I do not understand. But
granted, I'm early in the game, but I've had a solid between 80 and 90 FPS in 4K.
What about the city though? The first city only, because the other cities aren't
cities, and they have been fine. It is lower, but it's not been below 60 so far. This is with DLSS in quality, but
yeah, I definitely run DLSS. Yeah. Like that's just sort of the thing, I definitely have that. But yeah, I would just say, if you guys are looking at this and trying to figure out, let's talk about it this way. So They talked about microtransactions. They talked about the save game. They talked about all their stuff. When you look at all that kind of stuff, if those things are impacting you, I would say the one that you should worry about the most for any gamer is the FPS. And then, or maybe the save game first, depending on if you get corrupted. So those two are huge deals. When it comes to the FPS, be aware, the city's bad. Later after that, it's not so bad, but that city itself is bad. So be aware if you're thinking of getting it, it can have these like stutters in the city, but there's not a lot of quests in the city. So it's this really odd, you just have to, if you want to play the game, you could wait.
Mm-hmm.
You could wait. Or you could get it and just be like, I'm absolutely like going to just deal with this drop in FPS. And it's definitely a thing. Like there's no getting around it. It's noticeable.
But dude,
it's
the
a blast.
Pawns is it's so good. And sure they repeat stuff, but it doesn't even matter really, because it's almost magical to have pawns with like different abilities, personalities, or the impression of that. We always say, we're getting, we want to get fooled. The game has to only do a little bit.
Continue.
The game has to do only a little bit because we're willing to be, tricked into thinking that it's doing all these things. But the pawn stuff seems almost magical in a way. Like, it's kind of hard to describe because I had a couple of pawns to start with, and those were cool. Like, one of them was like playing it cool, kind of like giving me a few tips here and there. I thought that was nice. But then I took this pawn from a friend, and she's always the person when I go to play a game with her and she knows everything about the game, right? She's like an expert of the game. And it just so happened that her pawn had this, like, this is where we're going. I'll show you, Master. Don't worry, I know where this is. I've done this before. And it was almost like matching her personality in a weird way. Remember with the drivatars where we said, like, dude, I swear, like, that kind of drives like Reg or some other friend. And I bet a lot of it is me wanting to be fooled into that sense to some measure, but it's really cool, man.
Let me read the rest of the super chats real quickly. There was one more. Oh, first of all, somebody says there is a free mod for PC that turns DLSS frame gen on. So I did see that this morning. They said it implements it, and you do get a boost FPS. You would if it's frame gen, true frame gen versus DLSS. So there's a mod out there for PC. I have not tried it. I do, whenever I review, I don't use mods. I don't use any of that kind of stuff because I am just trying to review the general game. So I haven't tried that yet. $5 super chat from Ari says, not allowing trainers or mods even on single-player games is my line in the sand. That's the Rubicon for me. But not allowing trainers, does anybody... I mean, everybody does trainers. Like, you can do trainers regardless if they... Let's talk about mods. I don't know what the trainers part means, but not allowing mods, there are already mods for it as well. And I think File Nexus already has some mods. So do you mean, error, do you actually mean not having like a mod manager or something, like a specific mod manager in that? Because I would, yeah, I can see that. ACG, I'm playing DD2 and enjoy the game and appreciate your review. Thank you very much. Game was fun. I asked some people what they thought. I played 5 hours, pretty fun. Performance wasn't great. Mod applies to 4 series GPUs. Yeah. Game was fun. Ryzen with a 4080 gave me 70 FPS. Incoherent Rambler, $10 super chat. Paying $2 for a new character, new game is insane. It's like launching a game without saving and then loading and charging people for it. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. Like, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't think there's a way to explain that one.
Like, outside of those negatives, the game itself, it's almost like immediately captivating. I think I only felt this with Skyrim. It's the sense of like, dude, I'm about to embark on this fucking adventure that's gonna be incredible. I kind of had that with Rebirth, but in a different way, because it's a much more, sort of gamified experience, like, mini games and like JRPG and everything, where this is sort of like a pure fantasy adventure.
I will say the thing that blows me away is, like, when you look at this kind of stuff and all of these issues, which are completely valid, I will say there must be something to this game, because I go into chat and, like I said, you have like 40 people all streaming it, and they're all like, holy shit, this is incredible. And one of them was in there for 16 hours, and they're just like, and they had FPS issues at points, stuff like that, but they're still liking it. It's all I see is a really fun game that is unfortunately brought down by some dumb business decisions that we know cause problems already. And you and I talked about this, where I'm bitching about it. People come to the channel, so we all talk about it. You and I talk about it in a podcast, should be covered in reviews. But then I go outside of this. Even people who are generally somewhat connected to the channel, and they play, they're in the patron, but they're friends or whatever, they're just having an insanely fucking good time. Like, and I guess in a way I get mad. I get mad personally, because I'm like, I would much rather have everybody have a good time in a good game than an okay time in an okay game, or a bad time in a bad game. And so you get a good game that's then wrapped with this shit, and it becomes difficult to talk about it. Because I don't want to stop you from talking about it, because I do know that I have not seen anybody yet personally who is like, I hate it. They're all, I love it. Yeah, it's got some issues here, but which I feel like it's a loss leader. Like, I feel like, man, what were you guys doing? And I feel like games are like this all the time now. I truly start to feel like every single game launches now with some issue, except, strangely enough, Forbidden West, which runs like butter, looks amazing, is a great port. Yep. Aaron Wright, $8 super chat. I refunded once I got in. I didn't like my gate, and I couldn't restart. You can restart, but I agree with you. It's difficult to try to figure out how to friggin', delete stuff. Forbidden West is just, absolutely, like, destroyed it. They've done an incredible port job. And here's what also bothers me. Looking at this friggin' situation as a whole, ignoring everything else, I'm mad that Horizon Forbidden West doesn't have more players, because that is a phenomenal game. Forbidden West is a phenomenal game, and I would love to see more PC players jump. I mean, it is gorgeous. It's fun gameplay. It's a friggin' amazing looking world, and it runs on systems. We had some people in there with some pretty low level systems, and they were running quite well. And so you're like, this is doubly frustrating to me, because I knew this, or I was worried it was going to happen and it was going to get lost. And it released, it got a couple reviews. I think it didn't really get reviewed a ton. And then it got, I think Digital Foundry covered it, and they're like, okay, it runs really well. There's some issues here or there, but it runs really well. And even in our Discords, most people are focusing on Rise of the Ronin or on Dragon's Dogma. And they're like, oh, I'll get, Forbidden West down the line. And my personal opinion is they won't, which, that bothers me a little bit. I think
really rough.
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal game. Back to Dragon's Dogma and the enjoyment that you can have. I will say that despite all the other stuff, one of the great things about that is the pawn system, the interactive HUD. I do want to point out, people are saying, and I did see this, where people are saying, hey, you can't, you don't necessarily perfectly control your pawns. That is correct. The pawns will tell you. They'll be like, I'm aggressive, and I might ignore what you say to do this. I had Frankie was playing, and he was like, dude, my pawns aren't healing me a bunch. And I'm like, you need to look at what the pawn stats are, because if that pawn is like a glory seeker, they're going to be like, help yourself. And then he was trying to figure out why they weren't always healing him. And it's like, well, or healing themselves. And I was like, well, you got to make sure they have stuff, but also they may just go on the all-out attack. Like, that's the thing about the pawns. They're mini people, and it's an interactive HUD, which is phenomenal. Like, it's just the amount of data you get from them is so good. It feels so
Dude, it's
nice.
insane. I was walking around, and like one dude was telling me about plants. Like, dude, you can make, like something out of that plant. It is like actually useful information. And one other guy, because he had fought forget which enemy it was. He was telling me about the enemies. Like, dude, I fought a bunch of these. You know, you gotta hit them with fire or whatever.
Yeah, and we had, I mean, some of the craziest stories and moments. Like last night, Jay threw a goblin and killed a deer with it. And I was like, what the hell? Like, I mean, obviously, if you put two and two together, of course you can do that. But he became like a throwing master, and he was tossing goblins into the ogre to do damage. All this weird stuff where I was like, I had not thought of that. Like, I just had not thought of it because I thought my sword would do the most damage. But it wasn't Jay. Somebody else was playing, and they used a goblin to hit an ogre's face, which stunned the ogre. And I was like, dude, that's some hilarity right there. Like, that's something that is sort of that organic gameplay that you can do in these kind of games where they just let you pick up anything. And some of the spells will leave particles like ice, and you can pick up an ice cube and throw it at the enemy after the spell. So you have almost a double use in a spell. There's just some really amazing parts in that. But the HUDs and the pawns, when you hire a pawn and they're like, come with me, sir.
And I think the personality is pretty genius, because even though, you know, they have like a few only, it seems like it's a good deal of variety in there, because I tried one mage and she told me, like, listen, sometimes I'll go off on my own. I'll do my own thing. And that turned out to be a terrible combo with the healer, or like my mage, because I wanted her to, you know, like be around, be reliable. But she was off doing, you know, firing fireballs. And so I found another one that had a different personality that I think was kind-hearted. So she was, you know, really focused on
healing and taking care of people.
Yeah, so that was super cool.
Yeah. Space Channel 5, $5 super chat. DD2 feels like DD1. It's a good game that you get on discount 5 years after launch. I would say if you wait 5 years on this, it's going to look as old as DD1 did 5 years. Like the Dragon's Dogma games don't look precious.
Because the graphics
their lighting's good, but
like right now it looks great. Don't get me wrong.
In some places it looks old. Let's be honest.
I see. But
no, I get you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Like the way it ages is not rough. Like a Persona 5 where, you know, you could play that game 20 years from now.
Yeah, there's definitely some age problem with the Dragon's Dogma games. Their lighting in this one is phenomenal, and you'll notice it if you have the special effects on the PC. Yeah. You have the option for like true fire from your sword, which the original didn't have. Those kind of things look incredible. But it's not a game that ages like Forbidden West. No way. Forbidden West still looks day and date brand new. If you said Forbidden West was today,
I think today it's still one of the best games ever made.
And that's what you see is the difference, incredibly enough, when you look at Rise of Ronin, which looks pretty rough a lot of the times and looks a little pieced together. And you see Dragon's Dogma, which looks a little pieced together. And they don't look current, but they're current games that are released now, but they don't look like that AAA, you know, whatever that term may be, but you know, flashy and having good gameplay.
It's if you get a good one. Eurojank and AAA. It's kind of like, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Rise of the Ronin feels that way. Rise of the Ronin has some good parts, but the idea of doing an open world really hurt that game. And it dramatically impacts the enjoyment of Rise of the Ronin. Like, it just does not feel as enjoyable as it would be if I think they had gone back and said, you know, we're going to have this in our old style. By the way, I changed the member numbers. Thank you for people becoming members, and I appreciate it. Welcome to Sicko. Hellerish says, ACG, Capcom could easily fix this by removing Denuvo. Probably not. Probably not. If that were, or Denuvo, if that was the problem, you wouldn't see the drops in just one place. You'd see it in a bunch of places. That's not how Denuvo works. They have a very real issue in the first city. By the way, something I do want to point out is not replicated in later areas with a bunch of NPCs. The problem is not as replicated as that initial city, which is very odd, meaning to me they have some, you know, they have something going on in that major city they need to fix. I have the document. Says Horizon Mid was backed by Sony money. Yeah, it was. It was good.
Yeah.
Space Channel says I bounced off Horizon Zero Dawn, so not that interested in Forbidden. I get it, you know. So Zachary says, your casual dismissing of microtransactions as obvious, Jeremy, is a bit wild to see. It's not just MTS, it's the type of microtransactions. Start from the start of the podcast, I definitely do not dismiss them.
We do not dismiss, man.
No, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. But when you look at, especially when you look at Forbidden West, you look at Rise of the Ronin, you look at Dragon's Dogma 2, the other thing I can say is the competition is insanely high. And so if you do drop the ball in these instances, there isn't the comeback that like I don't know why people think No Man's Sky, everybody's going to pull a No Man's Sky. First of all, no one wants that. Who the fuck would want everybody to pull a No Man's Sky? That's ridiculous.
Like playing a football game from behind the entire time.
Right. Whenever you hear about a quarterback being really good from behind, you're like, dude, that's good, but you want him to be, wouldn't you want to be ahead and, do those kind of things? Focus on being
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and the competition is so high now that, man, any of these kind of stuff, it's just it's going to be held forever. And No Man's Sky is not programmed the same way as other games. It's procedural. It's using super formulas. It's not the same thing, and it's not as easy to do. What were we going to say?
Like when you look at Rise of the Ronin, I think that becomes clear that we take for granted a lot of stuff about the big open world games.
Yeah.
In how they build, and they are able to build open worlds. Like Ubisoft, people love to shit on Ubisoft games, but they make some incredible open worlds, right? Whether you like the activities in them or not, the actual like construction and how everything looks is, has been remarkable since like Odyssey, right? Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or actually, what's the prior one?
Origins?
The Egyptian one.
Origins, thank
you. Yeah. So, those are incredible open worlds. And then you look at Rise of the Ronin, and the fact is those guys have never been like the most, what do I want to say? Artistic? Or like,
they're more mechanical and how they put stuff together. Mechanics.
Yeah, I was saying the other day, they're not the Bob Ross of like developers. They have kick-ass gameplay, but the looks.
Forbidden West is the Bob Ross of developers, Guerrilla.
Yes.
Even if you don't like it. I mean,
dude,
it would be a very weird discussion. Yes,
like,
it would be a very weird discussion to have somebody be like, it doesn't look good. You're all. I think it does. Regardless, like artistically, it's phenomenal. And you look at Zelda, artistically, at times, Zelda can be phenomenal. It's just that it also has some of the issues we're talking here with performance and stuff like that, especially on the Switch 1, not Switch 2, but the Switch and stuff. Real quick, let me read these. SBZ, $5 super chat. Speaking of 5 years, today's the 5th year anniversary of Sekiro. Happy anniversary, fellow deflecting bros. Hellerreich says, "Oh, okay. I didn't know that later cities are better. Strange. Yeah, it is strange. It's definitely. Let me give you guys a weird example. If you've been gaming for a long time, Daggerfall and Morrowind, phenomenal games. Daggerfall, people. I mean, that's like 10 years before some people were born. Morrowind had a particular city that was unlike any other city, and they found out probably." Maybe months later, or maybe they knew right away, whatever, but gamers found out that it was because one of the cities crossed across 2 cells in their engine. A city, I believe it was Balmora. So you'd go in, you'd be like, whoa, the FPS is way worse here than anywhere else in the game. And I'm pretty sure they patched that or fixed it. But you do have situations in games where, whether it be the NPCs, whether, what have you, they have particular areas that are troublesome, including Dark Souls had the blight, what was the swamplands in Dark Souls? The blighted lands or whatever. Where everybody jokes Blight Town, which was like FPS down. It was like 12 FPS versus the rest of the game.
Routines.
Or Bloodborne with its consistent micro stutter. So, Jemmy, $2 super chat. Not to defend MTX, but I saw Explorer Camp in the game. What they're saying, guys, is Explorer Camp in the purchase is a lower weight, which is a negative. As in, that shouldn't be done. If you're going to put a micro in there, you shouldn't be changing it up, especially day one. Blighttown, Raging Monkey says, yeah. So, oh God, here we go with Blighttown. Now everybody's commenting on that. Yeah, it's a weird time, man. When you look at like Dragon's Dogma, phenomenal game, fun-wise, has some issues. It's going to take a while for them to figure out what they're doing. But I think also people will be more cognizant of the next Capcom game. We knew there was microtransactions in all of them, but for whatever reason, some of these games don't get, even if people talk about them, they don't. I don't know why, but I didn't hear as much complaining about Resident Evil's micros. Maybe that's because it was covered more, but I don't.
Actually, Monster Hunter World also had so many things to buy in the Steam store as well, like costumes for your handler in game, and all of just a lot of stuff. Yeah, that to me is it's something that we have to become accustomed to with, or not become accustomed to. If you don't want to, you can not buy any of these companies' games. But I would say Ubisoft definitely has their store day one. By the way, this is also something I do want to point out. In a lot of Ubisoft reviews, we've had to say there's a store, but we can't see the prices because they will do the same thing, but the store is not activated during the review. So you have to sort of guess what will be there and what the game offers. And that's, by the way, if you go back and look, many reviews for the many past Assassin's Creed games have been with the stores off. Far Cry might even be the same way. You go in, because this is one of the reasons why this should be covered. In all the Assassin's Creed games and Far Cry games, you go into the store and the first thing you do is hit a button and you wait to see, if it says you can't buy anything. But many of them will at least tell you the prices and what there is. It's just that you can't buy it. There's been some where the store wasn't engaged at all. Those are even worse, but sometimes at least you can hit a button and you can see what the price is or what they're selling. You just can't buy it. Cheating says, this does make me take a step back and wait. I won't be pre-ordering Wilds until ACG gives a thumbs up. Well, not just me. There's other reviewers out there. Like I said, if you guys are bothered by this, which you should be, by all means, man, unsubscribe. I get it. I joined and started doing YouTube because people didn't cover stuff. So if you're like, man, these things should be covered, they should. There's no, they should, especially in a game that's got its other issues as well. They all should be covered. Did Horizon have any micros? Forbidden West? I haven't checked it. No micros in Forbidden West. Yeah, dude. Switch over. I'll just say this. Switch over to Forbidden West then, because it's a good game and more of you guys should be playing that one. It's an amazing game, and they never get a good release time frame.
Yeah.
And it's really rough.
Yeah. No, I get it. I don't know what goes on there, but I do know that they get lost a lot. And especially now with all of these titles, we're just looking at so much competition, man. So many good games. Also, somebody says don't pre-order games. Exactly. Don't. Also, just because I give you a review, and I'm telling you, anybody, you don't need to buy the game just because I say I felt it was worth buying. You can wait for technical reports or you can still watch something and then wait. I do understand trust, but even if it were me, I would definitely.
I think nowadays,
I watch a couple reviews and
it's hard. It's hard for people.
Almost hard, but look at this game, for instance. You could pre-order it and you couldn't preload Dragon's Dogma. So what are you getting for the pre-order? You're probably getting a sword, I think. I think maybe you get some better weapons or something. I don't know. The pre-order stuff you get. But why? If anything in the world is going to change your gameplay, which we saw with Yakuza, everybody should also be talking about this with the Yakuza series, because Yakuza had those. Yakuza had stuff that you got a bunch of money for the island, and Abzi was very clear. It ruined a good deal of the game because he had all that money. Right? Now, Reg liked it. Reg was like, I got all this money. I can build up my town. But Abzi was like, dude, this actually, having so much money meant that the cycle of trying to get it was gone. So you have that too. What else do we have for Dragon's Dogma? Okay, so we've covered.
Okay, I have something I want to run by you.
And you can cover good stuff too. We don't just have to hammer on it.
Yeah. So I think the smaller towns are kind of a win too. And again, I'm very early in the game, so this could just be the early town. I don't know if they become bigger towns later on. But for now, you have a handful of people in these. And what I liked about that is that I kind of know who's in each town, and they even have a really good what do I want to say, journal of people you've met, and you can see for each person
that thing's awesome,
where they reside, information about their tastes, if you want to improve your relationship with them, Like, that's really cool, man. And you kind of remember these people because there's only a few of them, and you talk to most of them, whether for a quest or, you know, to buy something, and you kind of remember the people. I think that's really cool. That's actually kind of powerful, because in the bigger towns from, like, you know, AC games and stuff, everybody is a no face.
Yeah,
Because they're just randos.
Yeah, they're third gen characters. They're given third gen faces. They're given third gen itineraries. They're given third gen comments.
Starfield with like some of the rough faces for secondary.
You can
ones.
quite literally walk around that game and go, I know exactly what kind of character this is because of the way they look. Now, they've improved it a great deal. They actually did a patch that improved the generic faces. But when you first played that game, you could walk through a Starfield city, Atlantis or Aquila or whatever, on the Hope or whatever that planet. Anyway, whatever that city is.
Quest givers.
You could identify the exact quest giver. Yeah, you could be like, that guy's. It's almost like if you watched old cartoons like I did, you would see a cartoon action scene start up, and if you look closely, you could see a part of the wall or something that was slightly discolored. That was an indicator to the next person working on it that's where a laser would hit, or like in a laser battle. And you would watch it, and then like a quarter second later, the laser would hit, and that part would blow up. And so when you get accustomed to seeing it, you'd be like, oh, yep, I know this.
It's the same with like cartoons or anime. When one person among the crowd is very colorful and they have an amazing haircut and like a super cool jacket with all these details, everybody else has the, you know, generic clothes. You're like, that's that's a main character.
Reading some of these, and then I'm going to read it because I did ask Twitter to just light it up with what they thought about all this stuff. They had the same buying of stuff in the original. Yeah, MTX, non-issue, but the FTS is bad. Stop talking about a paywall, spreading bad information. There is no paywall. There is no paywall. For what? Dragon's Dogma? No, there's no paywall for Dragon's Dogma. You can do all the stuff in there except for that equipment thing and the start new player. The start new player is stupid. That's ridiculous. They need to change it. Neil says discolored because it will have motion. Exactly. Zero says this DD2 paywall thing is ridiculous. It's also very unhelpful. Performance is a serious issue that should make you consider a refund. MTX are not. Each to their own. I think MTX, depending on if it changes the gameplay, should impact you, but that's just me. All right, here we go. I put out the question, or like told people, hey, we're going to talk about all this kind of stuff. So I'm going to read these quickly. These are Twitter folks talking about different stuff. MK Strong says, so you can buy the DLC items mentioned in game and for fairly cheap. However, I think the bigger issue is being flat out unable to start a new character. Do you think this is a case of a gaming company prodding the boundaries to see what they can get away with? Yes, and there's two reasons why. Normally, I would say no. But I think when you see that purchase, and then on top of this, yes, I would say this is somebody looking, at sort of trying to identify it. Dan asks about the reviewers not covering it. We discussed that. Creative Monster says, modern men, what's stopping you from looking like this? And he shows a bunch of pictures of fat pawns, including my own. By the way, he took a picture of the review. Dude, yeah, my pawn is ridiculous looking. John Allen says, do you think more Souls-like games should have an easy mode like Rise of the Ronin? Because that's really drawing me to get this game, when I normally shy away from games like that. I don't think they should be forced to, but I think it helps, right? If there's,
I think it never hurts. That's kind of the way I would put it.
Yeah, but you're not.
Because it doesn't take away, right, from you playing in normal or hard mode, whatever.
The only thing it would take away would be resources, right? Money for time if you're balancing easy, because you would want to balance easy. And by the way, we've seen some devs, I don't know if you've seen this, Johnny, where a dev will say, we have multiple difficulties, and when you ask on Twitter or whatever what difficulty to play on, they'll say, well, we didn't balance hard and easy, we balanced medium or something. You're like, oh, okay. So, what does that mean? Let's see. Milk says, if you play through the whole game without noticing Micro's existence, then... Explosion. Oh, I think he's saying, boom. The game launches with some store items that are only visible on Steam. Does that make it a worse game? No, it doesn't make it a worse game unless those microtransactions are directly connected, which one is, for sure, which is that new game. I'm going to check onto the Explorer pack. I think a different weight is stupid, and that's setting themselves up for failure. It's dumb. That shouldn't be in there either. We covered Tommy, Skylark, a high ACG, and team. Got a question for the panel. If you choose only one of the following game franchises for the rest of your life, which one would it be? Yakuza or Final Fantasy? Do you know, Johnny? Did you hear the question? You had one game. Would it be Yakuza or Final Fantasy?
Probably Final Fantasy.
Damn you! Really? God, Yakuza for me. They both have mini games, though, Johnny. They both have They both have mini games. So.
But that's the beauty. I don't have to pick one. Like in this day and age, we have all sorts of amazing different games.
Yeah. GA says, no effing way. With Orbs and DMC, guns and Resident Evil games, and millions of MTX and Monster Hunters, no one said anything. Now they cry for everything. God. I would say that that's not necessarily true. I think that I remember people complaining about the Monster Hunters, complaining about that kind of stuff. So I don't want to speak too soon, but I can't see people ignoring them. It seems to me that would be weird. BatTech says, the fact the director of the game said he designed the game to not make fast travel easy and then to sell a MTX is complete BS. I would say that the game was already about hard travel, and since you can get those items in the game, and they're quite easy to get, that part is less bothersome to me than the new game save plus. We answered Below's question. That's it for those. So, moving on from there. Dragon's Dogma, fun game. Definitely got microtransactions. Definitely a stupid thing in the world. Hopefully, they do something about the performance first. I think performance is going to be the big thing.
I think perform the save thing that probably also fairly easily fixed.
Yeah, fairly easily fixed. They need to figure out a way by the way, I believe this will be modded. Oh, one thing about Dragon's Dogma. I absolutely, Johnny, think somebody is going to mod that city in 0 seconds, man. It's going to happen. Somebody's going to either say, check these NPCs' quests less often, update their AI.
Optimize.
At a quarter. Yes. It's going to happen. Now, they might be worried that because they move, there's some tracking issue, but I can tell you this. I don't know about anybody in chat, but personally, I would much rather have higher FPS and some NPCs in that city that bump into shit as they correct their movement. If that can happen, I would much rather have that, and I think that should be done day one. Like, just be like, okay, they're good, we know, because you would be able to say, let's say you did that day one, you'd be able to say, we know about some pathing issues in some places versus we know the performance is shit in this city. Like,
yeah.
Right? Because people be like, oh, the pathing issues in this suck. We're accustomed to some of those. But let's see. What else is there for Dragon's Dogma?
Well, one thing, would it be fair to say Dragon's Dogma 2 was one of the biggest anticipated games for you personally, given you liked the first one so much?
Nah, not. I really wanted it, but I've been burned by by sequels way, way too often. So, and I get a lot of shit even in our chat where I think it was 2 podcasts ago where people were like, dude, you never seem excited about this, or because I'm always saying we don't know how it's gonna arrive. I've been burned by
turn it down.
Jedi Survivor, where I thought this is going to be the improvement of things, and it was the not improvement. I've been I was not a huge fan of Valhalla when it first released. It had a lot of bugs, and it also had worldwide performance issues, and the story, it was bloated, those kind of things. Bloated I can sort of live with because you could still do the quest in about 10 to 15 hours more than Odyssey, and Odyssey is a big game, so I was okay with that. But yeah, dude, I've been burned on a lot of sequels, man. Sequels.
Far Cry 6 was,
Far Cry 6 was mixed. Rough. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Far Cry 6 in particular. The Far Cry games in particular, since 3, I think, I've been much more hedgy on not looking forward to them. In fact, the remake of KOTOR, I was like, I don't like. I think it's best to just step back and wait till it comes and then be like, okay, this is what we got, and that's exciting. But somebody said FF16 was dog shit. That's interesting.
You were...
This one, I'm interested in the series.
It was a worthy successor.
Except for performance, which unfortunately Dragon's Dogma 1 launched with a ton of performance
Also
issues
had,
too.
yeah.
It was MT Framework, and this is the RE engine. But if you go back and look, about 6 podcasts ago, one of you guys was really excited about Dragon's Dogma, and I was like, well, realizes the first RE engine game that's open world, so we don't know how it's going to... That's the thing, is you get people like going, oh, it's changed to the Unreal, and you're like, well, Unreal's known for for stutter. You know, so it's like we get more issues as the games get bigger and get, you know, more advanced. So
kind of similar
I
to like Final Fantasy VII going to open world from remake to rebirth.
Remember, because I was really worried about that. I was, you know, well, you won the bet. I said, you know, Final Fantasy VII was never coming.
Oh yeah,
and you won that bet. Yeah. Super chat. NAI Sec 129 says, do you think De Novo hurt FPS? Also, I want to say I appreciate you guys. I think De Novo has an impact on FPS, in particular on the level of De Novo you choose, and I don't know what this one is, but I would say because we see impacts in this one particular city and less so everywhere else, still not always performant, I think that we should worry more about them fixing that city than De Novo, even though nobody likes DRM. Nobody likes DRM. We all want to pirate. I'm just joking. Don't clip that. Somebody will be like, oh my God, KARAK's pushing piracy. But with Dragon's Dogma also, I think one of the cool things, like you've only played it a couple hours, you seem to be enjoying it. What character did you choose?
Archer.
Ooh, you went
Pretty
Archer.
cool starting class. Yeah. And I was a bit worried with, you know, shooting and controller. But the fact is they have a lot of auto-aim stuff. And even with the free camera, it works pretty well. There are a lot of times where you shoot, you know, the other enemy that you didn't mean to shoot. But, you know, realistically in a game like this, I'm finding, based on everything I'm seeing from you and other people, that it's much more of a knowledge game than it is like a skill game. You know, like I guess you would say Monster Hunter, you know, there's some really super high skill ceiling weapons in there. I think this one is much more about knowing what are, you know, strong attacks, when they're effective, how to tackle enemies and stuff, more than being super accurate or...
Right. And one of the things a lot of people are saying, rangers and fighters, I would say also with Dragon's Dogma, one of the things I really do like is that they focused those vocations a little more. And so when you start using them, when you switch vocations, it is insane. I mean, the change in how the game plays from vocation to vocation is not, I swing the sword slightly slower. It is a massive, massive difference between the vocations, which feels good, because that means if you decide you want to switch over to a different vocation, and you do, you feel like that is a huge change to way everything feels. And I'm telling you, the easiest way to see it is if you start as a fighter and you go to a warrior. It is mind-numbing how big that change is. It's almost like going from the lightest weapon in Monster Hunter to the absolute heaviest, and then also having no stamina. Like it is the gulf there, but then also with the add-ons of all the resistances and stuff, it just feels good but different. And I'm not good as a warrior. I switch back.
It's also really intelligent that you can switch very easily from the get-go. So you can just, you know, buy a sword and say, well, I'm going to be a fighter for a bit. And you can do that. You know, there's no penalty, because a lot of games, let's be honest, they like penalize you for switching, because either you had a much better weapon and now you're sort of gimped, you know, with an inferior setup, or like different things, or maybe you have to pay you know, a huge amount of money to change back and forth. So I think it's really intelligent that they actually encourage you switching, right? Because you're able to learn some of the augments. Those are like skills that carry over between vocations.
Somebody asked if you can obtain any of the MTX in-game. Yeah, you can obtain them all. The only one that we're talking about is possibly the one pack may weigh less, but you can get the packs in the game very easy. Yeah, so when you look at it and the changes and stuff that they've done to the vocations, I think all that was a huge positive. Even though they did remove one or two vocations.
Did you miss the one that, I think it was one they removed, or a couple?
No. I think the game is dramatically better dramatically better from a combat standpoint than 1. Dramatically in all ways, whether it be the pawns are better and you know more about what they're going to do, whether the reactions of the game world. Dude, we saw it, like, you can grab on, if you get multiple pawns on like an ogre's arm, he'll slip over and fall onto that side. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that may have happened in 1, but with a lack of transparency. And there's something in this game when a pawn walks up to you and they tell you exactly what they're going to do, that you can look at it and go, okay, I want a mage, but this guy's mage isn't really, this sorcerer isn't going to do sort of what I need him to do. So I'm going to get a different sorcerer. And it matter, if you go generic, you might pay for it. That's the cool thing, is if there's 3 sorcerers, you have to look at it and be like, okay, I really want this sorcerer who plays the exact way I want. And then if you're a fighter and you pick other people, it changes insanely. Like, I did all sorcerers, and they were merging spells, so they were casting all their spells faster, which a lot of people think I need a split of pawns. I need a fighter. I need
almost
a sorcerer.
Like an MMO, you need a tank.
Yeah, but in this game, you're like, no, I absolutely don't. I'm just going to change the way the entire way, like, I use them, whether it be come to me, whether you say go forward and attack on your own. It changes that entire way they feel and play, and the way you feel and play. And you haven't even got to some of the monsters that are. There's some stuff in that game that is just absolutely crazy. Like, despite all the other issues, even the FPS stuff, dude, there are fights in that game that are, well, I guess with Monster Hunter, I'm sure you had some great fights. And I know, sure. I think you also said there might have been some frustrating ones, if that was you saying that. Yeah. I never got frustrated in Dragon's Dogma 2, ever. It was... even if I fought a guy and I was like, what the hell, this certain character's bucking me off or what have you, all I did was die and either resurrect or die and reload my save and go back and be like, okay, I see him, I'm going to send my pawns quicker. Or I see him and I'm going to keep my pawns back. Or I see him and I'm going to switch a pawn. There's a pawn on the road. I'm going to go see if this guy can offer some assistance that one of my dudes can't offer, I think the only thing that does bother people is when they're playing, the pawns don't level up with you. Yours does, but they don't. And I think that a lot of people fall in love with a pawn, and that has happened. Last night I saw it happen with multiple people. They're like, I love this pawn. Like, they look goofy or they have a weird name and I like the way they fight and I don't really want to sell them. And I have seen people hinder their gameplay because they love somebody else's pawn.
Holding on to the level 1,
yeah, that is really cool in a meta way, in like just a experience way, where people are like, I really want to do this. Play says, are the commands how you shape their overall behavior? Yes, that's exactly right. They're basically overall, you tell them to run, come to you. What is it? It's like there's 4. There's run forward, heal me, return to me, and one other. I use those 3 the most. I don't remember the other one.
Yeah,
but there's 4.
On it now.
Yeah, I just use those 3 all the time. But yeah, it's awesome, man, despite that stuff. I love climbing on the creatures' backs and just stabbing them in the face, man. It's just... saw some gameplay where pawn threw a monster across the map. Oh, that's the other thing, Johnny.
Dude, so you can toss...
Yes, and you're training your pawn, right? When I don't know if you know this, but the pawn will play as you play. So as you play, if you grab a bunch of stuff or smash a bunch of stuff, they will slowly, almost like a drivatar, but a little bit filtered through their class. So you'll get a friend whose character was throwing a lot of shit, and you get that pawn in, and that dude's like...
just going to ham.
Yeah, picking up. And the other cool thing is, if you're in the middle of a fight, I've ran in, grabbed, like a pawn, and then ran out to heal them. And so picking up pawns to save, or so that you can save them later, is really cool. You can actually do that kind of stuff and play that, those kind of gameplay elements. Varen says the problem with MTX is the design. They're intentionally designed components of the game. They aren't against changing. They just want it to be designed as viable. Yeah, all of these were in Dragon's Dogma 1. There is no change to Dragon's Dogma 2. So these micros that are existing, you can get in there. It didn't change Dragon Dogma's to gameplay, but they're there, and they're definitely an issue for some of them. It's a single-player game, and people think microtransactions are okay. No, I think people don't think so. At least that's what I've seen. Molotov says, "What's up, Michelle?" Whew. Damn, I haven't seen Michelle in a while. Damn, girl. I hope the guitar stuff is going well and the band stuff. She says, "I wonder how AMD's flagship system will handle it." I've noticed AMD's seem to be pretty good compared to Intel's. I could be wrong on that. I don't want to speak out of turn, but AMD's definitely has some stuff that.
Are we talking like CPU, GPU?
CPU. Yeah, GPU.
Yeah, my AMD CPU has been doing pretty well with the game so far.
What are you running?
5900X Ryzen.
5900X. Yeah, that's actually one of the better chips. I mean, to be honest, you do have a pretty powerful
pretty good.
system.
Yeah, it's pretty good, in all honesty. By the way, give me 1 minute. I need to open the door. I'll be right back.
Go for it. Johnny needs to open the door to let his pawns in. Yeah, anyway, Michelle, it's nice seeing you around. I hope everything's going well for you. Duz Morte says, the physics are my favorite part. Yeah, let's see. Sam Turner says the game is really CPU dependent in the cities. In particular, one city. I do want to point that out. The other cities, a little less. Tumbo says, I suspect Intel handles it a bit better than AMD. In the big city, my 14900, sorry, Jesus. Damn, you have a powerful card. Is around 65 to 70. I've seen dips to mid-50s, but nothing crazy. Koza says, no one likes microtransactions. Yes, that is true. Ben Bop says, I think it's strange how gamers are taking a stand against DD2 now that this has been going on for years. Micros are still here because gamers buy them. So I do want to point out that because we all talk about micros and stuff, and you're in a review channel, we talk about them. But when outside of this, whether I like it or not, there's a lot of people out there that just don't care about micros. Whether I'm not saying they're good or bad, I'm just saying a lot of gamers that I talk to, whenever I bring them up and I'm like, hey man, blah, 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 you get a lot of shit where you realize that they just don't speak your language. I've been talking, for instance, about complaints about something for microtransactions in a whether it be a Ubisoft game or an Activision, a Call of Duty game or what have you. And the people I talk to are like, what? I bought this skin, this gun, and I'm just like, okay, I get, and no matter how mad I get, they don't care. No matter how much I complain. Wonder Duck says, I loved a video I saw where a dude picked up a goblin and just threw him into some water and watched a tentacle monster kill him. Yeah, you can definitely do that in the game. We'll try to pop into the Discord later. Yeah, no worries, Michelle. I'm just glad you're doing well. We had noticed, I hadn't seen you for a while, but I do see that you're in the Discord. Yeah, I hope you're doing... Molly's still with you, your cat. That's cool. So if you decide to kill a bunch of NPCs in town and your pawn learns the behavior, will your pawn then randomly attack NPCs? So my pawns have definitely been in a fight that I did not instigate, and I do not know how that happened, but I also did not fight a bunch of people in cities. So I don't know where they learned it, because it's my main pawn. Esker Outcome says, as long as the gameplay isn't affected, I don't mind them being there, but I'm a big Assassin's Creed fan, so that might make me biased. I can see why you would think that makes you biased. Listen, guys, everybody can be all mad about everything. I get it. Like, I truly do understand where people are bothered, but I also understand that some, in fact, many are not. Julius, welcome to being a YouTube member. I appreciate it. Helps the channel. Johnny had to open up his door there for his pawns. Had to let his pawns in.
We're back.
Did you let the pawns in?
I did.
Yeah, I figured. They were out there. Well, Stefan says, washing his hands, LOL. So moving on from there, Dragon's Dogma stuff, talk a little bit about Rise of the Ronin. I would love to see anybody who's played Rise of the Ronin, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, and what you like and dislike. Because I think Rise of the Ronin, when it comes to the actual gameplay itself, is going to be really back and forth. There's going to be a lot of people who I think have a big problem with the way that game plays because of the open world. Hopefully some can ignore it. I certainly can say it bothered me. It felt pretty janky. It still feels janky. I don't know how that game's going to hit people, and I'd love to know as people get it what they think, whether it's today or Wednesday. Are you getting Rise of the Ronin, Johnny?
Later and at a sale.
On a sale? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's not particularly grabbing me.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. Welcome, Michelle, for being a member. I appreciate it very much. Like I said, it does help the channel. Esker says, ACG, I was so excited for Rise of the Ronin, but from what I hear, it might not be a buy. I think with Rise of the Ronin, The one thing it is better FPS. It's, well, I shouldn't say it that way because it's got the same switch we've seen. You can do ray tracing, performance, and quality, but it's a PlayStation 5 game, so you need to be aware that, there's some issues there. Did you see that Final Fantasy added a new part of their quality mode? A sharp and soft version or something? Like something along that lines? Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
I mean, it feels like we've moved on from Final Fantasy, so it's going to be difficult. It's a late patch. And so I feel like a lot of people powered through Final Fantasy. And so the idea of going back
I'm
is
still playing
less.
it. I think I really got used to some of the compromises in the performance mode enough that, I just kind of stopped noticing it. It didn't bother me as much because the fluidity was my main concern, with the graphics mode where everything looked a bit too framey for me.
Okay, I got you. Dev Guy says they added performance sharp and smooth, but it doesn't do anything for me on a monitor.
Oh, no.
What? That's interesting. So you're saying there was no difference?
Interesting.
Yeah, that's yeah. I don't. That seems weird. Costa says in the wilderness it's smooth at 80 to 100, but the cities I saw are 29 FPS. He's talking to SB. I don't know what game he's talking about. Kiguri says performance soft is how it looked in the demo on performance. So performance soft is how it looked on the demo. Yeah, I think that with Final Fantasy, a lot of people just moved on, man. There's a lot of games. And Final Fantasy, I know FOMO isn't only a thing, but spoilers. People don't want to be spoiled, so they want to play the game and get it out of the way before somebody can give them a YouTube thumbnail with the spoiler on there. I actually had a hard time with Dragon's Dogma's thumbnail, weirdly enough, because I wanted it to look good and unique, and I wanted to put a monster in there that's in their trailers and all that stuff, but I was still nervous that, I don't know, maybe somebody out there just knows the game's name is Dragon's Dogma, and they don't know any monsters you fight or whatever, but I had a really good screenshot, and I was like...
But, you spoiled the,
you know... Do you worry
Xbox.
about your screenshots when you do the occasional review and stuff? Are you, stressing it?
Not too much, because also usually I'm not able to do it day and date because I don't, get a code or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm usually coming out with a review when I beat a game, which is, a week or a couple weeks after it's come out. So everybody's like, yeah, we already know, who's who and everything.
Esker says, ACG, if you could recommend a Final Fantasy game to a total beginner, what game would you recommend? Let's go with Johnny first. What game? If I said, hey man, I want to be somewhat current and I want to play a Final Fantasy game that takes everything about Final Fantasy and puts it in a game. My answer, everybody already knows. Even though he asked, I think everybody already knows what mine is. But what would yours be?
It depends on your preference, turn-based, real-time combat, blah, blah, blah. But if I have to pick one, I think the 7 remake is a really good shout, because the first one is fairly simple to get into, and then Rebirth builds on it really well, and it's become something much more impressive than the original, I think. I think those are just better versions of even the original, which was really good. Yeah.
I mean, I would normally go with that, but the lack of the ability to leap up caused me a lot of issues, and I feel like the story felt a little weird because 7 and remake and Rebirth are this odd amalgamation of story bits. I still would say, I know nobody will agree, but I just think 15 encapsulates
15?
exactly. Well, here's the thing. I said this in the review for 16 too, that if Rebirth, that if you ask everybody what makes up a Final Fantasy, you will probably get 11 answers. Even if you ask 9 people, somehow you'll still get 11. It's different for everybody, but to me, it's huge fantasy elements with camaraderie and partnership and a story that tries to push that. And 15, for whatever reason, the interactions with the characters, the exploration, the car, the boy band thing fits more my idea of the big grandiose Final Fantasy, where remake was pretty contained. And that's the only reason I'm saying that. And I don't want to suggest Rebirth because that's in the middle of a game. Like that's a...
Yeah, true. I was thinking of like the sequence, remake plus Rebirth. But you're right. If you talk about just one game, it's a bit trickier.
Yeah.
But I think the story wasn't that good in 15. I like the camaraderie. I like the moment to moment a lot.
Yeah. I would agree. And also, it was bad enough that I believe in the DLC, they fixed some of it by putting origin stories in and some stuff to fix it. So
but
I would say...
again, I think every Final Fantasy has its, peaks and valleys. And you could say 10 is probably also pretty close to like the perfect version of one of those games, I would say. But then that also had its, shortcomings.
Yeah. So when I ask the question, I see a lot of 10s. Trento says 4, 6, 7, 9, or 10. That's a lot of... you just covered like at least 50% of the entire series that's even playable right now. 15. Dev Guy says 15 surely. So I've got one person. Dev Guy and I are the only ones I think that I see who agree that 15 is the one. Oh wait, yeah, no, Dev Guy. Yep, that's Dev Guy again.
15 enjoyers. You just like Cindy, the mechanic, the heavy.
Did I? Yes, I did.
Front end mechanic, yeah.
Yes, I did. But I liked the getting in the car and exploring, and I played it prior to driving the car everywhere. I played it when the car was still stuck on
even just the scenic
street.
Route version was really good.
It was, and in a lot of RPGs, travel's a big deal. Like the movement forward, exploration, all that kind of stuff. The idea of getting in that car and going together, there was something about that just spoke to me because I love driving cars. It's like one of my passions of a drive to me is, it's going to sound creepy.
And the
I don't even want to say it.
Was a
almost
road
sexual.
Trip, right?
Yeah, the whole thing is, yes, but there's something, you hear people talk about cars as sexy. I'm not that kind. I don't mean it that way. I mean alluring or mysterious. When you get in a car and you go on a country road and and it's quiet, or you listen to the music and you're just moving through the world, that to me is tasty,
I think the road trip thing is genius for sure.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah, it was a really good. And let's be honest, swords, guns, magic cars, like those. Yeah,
it works.
And heavy top end ladies, right? Like it speaks to. There's a lot of people that would speak to. A lot of youngins. I want to know who's hyped for Sandland. Do you see the Sandland stuff? That looks pretty good.
No.
You're froze up, man.
That's.
You're like totally. You want to restart? Wizard of Smoke, $5 super chat. Happy Friday. Take my money for fast travels. On another note, going to celebrate part of my birthday Tuesday on Discord, playing 76 when the new season drops. Maltov says, couldn't get with Final Fantasy 16. Felt bland and lifeless. Dude, dudette. I believe that is a absolute truth for 16. There's a lot of people who felt 16 was almost too DMC, even in its story, not just in its combat, but in that darker emo style story. So I can definitely understand where that's coming from. Johnny's going to reset. You're good, Johnny. You're good.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay.
You just had some stutters there. What do you think about that, Johnny? Do you feel the same way about 16's story, Final Fantasy 16? Like this a little too dark?
16. Yeah, there was very little levity and fun that people were having with each other. There were a couple of characters that you kind of felt pretty close to, but then there were a lot of kind of disconnection that I felt with a lot of characters. I didn't feel like I cared about what, Joshua was going through. Yeah, and there was no... I know we talked about it when it was about to launch, like the lack of a party. I mean, sometimes you are in a party technically, but I really felt that. I felt like it was a more disconnected experience overall.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. Especially in an RPG, not having a party feels a little alien, if that makes sense. I mean, because it feels like such a RPG thing. So when a lot of it you're alone, It reminds me of the difference between a Dark Souls and an action game, where Dark Souls, all the lore is in the books and stuff, and it's a quieter world. There's less talking characters. It can have an overarching feeling of direness, of like aloneness. And that doesn't speak to me in an RPG. So 16 I liked. I thought 16 was enjoyable, but I would certainly say it was definitely on the darker, more dire side.
It was like almost a Game of Thrones version.
Very good point. Yes, I think I said that in a review. Exactly, right? Game of Thrones, where it's like that
the heaviness.
The heaviness. Bit. Yeah. And I don't know if everybody wants to do that. I mean, it obviously, it did okay. I think it didn't do the greatest.
And it had some epic fights. It had some great moments. But for me, and you were saying very well that if you ask 11 people, you'll get 11 different definitions of what a good Final Fantasy game should be. But for me, the core of it has always been a group of friends, the camaraderie, and them managing to still have some fun in an adventure in the midst of
terrible shit,
earth-shattering chaos and destruction.
Yep, we're in total agreement. That's exactly right. Like, not the Mass Effect thing where they're all banging. You can have that. But there's something about them, high-fiving right. and like the camaraderie during the dire times where they still... It's like a war movie when people are in the trench and somebody says, dude, this is pretty, I got to poop or whatever. And you're like, wait, what? Like, that's such a weird thing to say, but it causes a little bit of levity, which then it's easier to sort of continue to play if it does get dark. I do want to point out, somebody said, Craig Jackson said, ACG, Fighting Cowboy not even finishing Ronin was all I needed to hear. He's talking about Rise of the Ronin, and I would say, yeah, Rise of the Ronin definitely feels like a game that a lot of people will have a problem with continuing to push forward through. Right? That was definitely my issue. I had, I was playing other games as well as my own private games or, games I like to enjoy, and Rise... It was very hard to go back because it's so disjointed in places. I don't think that's going to be replicated by a lot of people. A lot of people are just going to want to jump in. But I will say it's closer to Dynasty Warriors, weirdly enough, than it is. That's sort of unfair to say than it is Neo, but at times it feels like that. It feels like the open world caused less resources to be used in the places you would expect from one of their titles. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Let's see.
When I heard you talk about the stances and also Cowboy, the stances in Rise of the Ronin, I couldn't help. I was just laughing because I knew that was the one thing you hated in Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah,
and they took that one thing and put it into,
Well, and Johnny, it's not only that; it's that. So here's a sword game where you really only have one attack button. Yeah, and I know that sounds weird to a lot of people. A lot of people don't care. A lot of people won't. It won't bother them, but it did bother me because I felt like a layer of complexity wasn't there that I would have liked to have seen, even with one single other button. Now, the counter spark does hit people, and you do get later skills that do all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's just when you first engage with it, you're. Have you ever done that where sometimes you're thinking, I think I missed something. I think, like, am I supposed to hold down a button to do the other attacks? Because I don't understand why it's just sort of this one button. It gets better, but Super Tramp, $5 super chat. He says, so both of you, would you say 2024 is the best? Oh, what would you say is the best game of 2024? What is the best? Let me look at what I've reviewed. What is the best game of 2024? Anybody in chat, feel free to pop off on what you think. Oh, I want to say this will not go over well. 2024.
What, you're gonna say Balatro or something unexpected?
No. I don't know if people will agree, but to me, the game that captured gameness the best this year is probably Pacific Drive.
Interesting.
Yeah, like I like Dragon's Dogma 2 a ton. It is fucking unbelievably fun, but it does have its issues. Pacific Drive had a couple issues, but it is friggin' atmosphere, gameplay, it made me like a survival game, or what do you call it, chopping trees down, because it changed to cars.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I was playing that game and I was doing stuff in that game, I was like, holy shit. Like this, and I love X-Files, I love SCP, I love the paranormal shit. So
the
that's
whole
mine.
thing.
Yeah.
Clicks.
What about you? What have you enjoyed the most?
It has to be Rebirth, because I think it's in a way like the culmination of what they were trying to do with the original game. It just, it's so much more than that was.
Rebirth is good.
It's also incredibly cathartic for someone like myself who, grew up with the original game. The music of everything coming together. They have so much more depth to all the locations.
So I got to ask you a question
up, right?
about
like in
this.
Size.
Is that, ignoring the nostalgia if you can, and I know it is good, I legitimately think that's easily Pacific Drive level, or there was another one I was going to say. So it's high. When you played Final Fantasy Rebirth, did it do everything as good as you expected, or did it do stuff better, or did it do stuff worse, like that you expected? Did you go into it and you left satisfied in all ways, or was there something that even elevated above your expectations where you were like...
I haven't finished it yet. I'm like 80 hours in.
Well, that's enough to be able to answer the question for sure.
I can talk about it for sure. I think, like, for expectations, there were two sides. There's the gameplay and then there's the story.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, the story, I expected them to do something weird because they started, doing the... what are they called again? The whispers, right? The ghosts that show up and kind of mess up with things. So I expected them to do something different there. I think with the story so far, they've done pretty much, bang on what I expected, which is the original, very well done, and expanding characters, plus having this little twist with the whispers and some weirdness that I won't talk about because it's spoilery. I think on the gameplay,
go ahead.
Go for it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. That's what I was going to ask. Go for it.
The gameplay side, my fear was that it was going to be very repetitive, because open world, we're just going to go to a new area and we're going to have the same set of activities. To a certain extent, that's true. But the fact is, every region is very fresh. And, we should talk about it in terms of how they did the design, because I thought that was interesting to get into how they managed to keep it fresh, because largely the activities are the same when you look at the open world and the things you have to do to sort of unlock everything, the areas. But every area has a very distinct feel and traversal mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
So, this usually hinges around the chocobo and what it can do in the region, but it's really impactful. So you go to a new region and it's like, oh, I can do this now. And all of a sudden, the entire exploration revolves around that in a clever way. And you have to keep your eyes open to figure out, how can I get up there? And a lot of times I was puzzled, man, I can't figure out how I can get on top of that thing. And there's always an answer to it, where you take a step back, you look at it from a different angle, and then, oh, I get it. And you go and do it, and it makes sense. So I thought that was really nailed. So and the fighting part, I think there's no way around it, is just better than the first one, because you have all the synergy stuff that you can do. And the playable characters in this one, for me, make a huge difference. I won't say I guess it's technically a spoiler to, say who they are.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say, but yeah.
They introduce a lot of freshness to the formula, because I did feel in the original that Tifa fought similarly to Cloud, in my opinion. Or, felt similar enough that it wasn't a big change to switch to Tifa, for example. But in this one, switching to these other characters felt like something very different.
It's cool to hear somebody who felt like everything matched a nostalgic game. It's 25 years old or more, whatever the original game is, and a remake like that where they did a really good job. Because for newcomers like me, I played the original, but I don't remember it, and I'm not going to go revisit such an old game. But I would agree with all that. Like the same exact positives for a player who knows everything about it is the same as somebody like me who doesn't, which I thought was really cool. And their open world it's got its issues. It's got its jank. He looks like an idiot. He goes downhill and uphill in the same animation. All that kind of stuff you expect.
The terrain.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah.
And it's got its quality performance stuff. And I'm loath to even bring that up because I do believe we're now focusing like a lot of times too much technical on, is the picture this is turn your sharpness up for Christ's sakes, whatever. There's these things, but they do bother me when I see that kind of stuff. But when I was playing Final Fantasy and I went into the grasslands, it did the one thing the hinterlands didn't do in like Dragon Age Inquisition, which is make me want to stay there. Dragon Age Inquisition, the hinterlands made me want to die inside. I've rarely been where I get an internal angst to where I just want to start karate chopping shit because I'm like, I can't be here anymore.
That's the Blighttown that we said before. It's like, get me out of here.
Get me out of here. And the reason why I compare them is because they're both party-based. You go to sections, which you do in Final Fantasy. It's almost Ubisoft in a way when you start looking at the map and how it's separated, But you're playing Final Fantasy, and I remember I was in the grasslands, and I was telling somebody, I was like 9 hours in the grasslands, still puttering around, doing random shit, and just exploring and looking around and being like, oh my God, it's never happened. 15 was close. There were times in 15 where I explored, but I think Rebirth has something about its landscape, which I was like, damn, this is... Like you look off into the ocean and you see the way the erosion is done correctly on the rocks. And this is all engine stuff and good artists, but it just looked like a fantasy location. And it wasn't replete with enemies. That was the best part of Rebirth. Rebirth did not, first, they're not invisible, best part, because some games, the old games would do invisible. So you can see them, which is great. Yeah. But you see these enemies, you can choose, you can switch your party members pretty easily by going in there and switching your leaders and your back characters. And like you said, Tifa, now she's a boxing champ. She basically, she's just uppercutting the shit out of people. And it was awesome to be able to play. It was a little messy, I will admit, in some combat. And I've heard this from almost everybody. The first couple hours, they're like, I don't know if I'm bad or if there is too much going on screen. And I would absolutely go on to the second part. They're probably not bad. Is that game loves its effects and its over the top shit. But when you get the cat Red, whatever he is, Sabretooth or whatever, when you start sending him to attack and he does these specials and all this kind of stuff, there's something magical in Rebirth that really hits hard. It's a good game. It's a very good game. I was asking people what they thought of good game or what their games were. Dragon's Dogma 2, Helldivers 2, Final Fantasy Rebirth, Helldivers 2, Dragon's Dogma 2, SnowRunner Expeditions. That's awesome because I enjoyed that game. It had some issues, but I'm glad somebody's playing it. Here on Business, $10 super chat. Absolutely appreciate super chats. Thank you very much. Rebirth, Infinite Wealth, very good game. Yeah. That's the only one I can't speak on fully because I have not jumped into that one. Let's see. Infinite Wealth, Helldivers 2, or Pal World. Supertramp, $5 super chat. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Pacific Drive is a fair choice, somebody says. Dragon's Dogma 2. Imagine if KARAK said Skull and Bones. Okay, come on, man. Come on. Mine is Yakuza Infinite Wealth. That's Sailor Mercury. Forgot to include a message, but always appreciate the whole ACG. Thank you very much here on Business. We appreciate it. Rebirth, Suicide Squad. That's not a sarcastic response, just so people know. I know people who really enjoyed Suicide Squad. Maybe they didn't play a ton of games, but Unicorn Overlord, Dragon's Dogma, Final Fantasy Rebirth, Overlord again, Infinite Wealth. Man, there's a lot. And then Michelle, always with the Jean Rain. She said Jean Rain. Come on, man. Come on,
we
man.
got
Jean
a lot
Rain.
of Helldivers
Got a lot of Helldivers,
Empires
man.
as well.
Got a lot of Helldivers. A lot more Dragon's Dogma fans, even though it's in a shorter time. I know a lot of people are loving it despite those issues. Supertramp, $2 super chat. Thanks for the in-depth answer. Yeah, you bet. Rebirth, Helldivers 2. Damn. That's sort of, it's not really necessarily eclectic, but it's still, that's a good breadth of games. I mean, we saw Expeditions in there. That's like not what I expected to see. So,
Yeah.
Joseph became a member. Thank you very much, Joseph. You rock. I appreciate it. I was going to say another game. So let me look at this list. I want to read off one other game that I actually think is pretty good, is Banishers. Now, it's not the best game in 2024, but dude, Banisher's writing is fucking legit. And it shows that while they have their other stuff, man, oh man, did they do a good job. Dev Guy says Tekken 8. Or he has to shout out Tekken 8. Turnoff says Star Wars Battlefront. I don't care. LOL. Star Wars Battlefront had a lot of issues. I saw somebody playing it a couple days ago and really liked it. Did you do Banishers, Johnny? You did,
Not
right?
yet.
Not yet?
No.
Okay. So I guess that's only me and Silver or did Silver do it? But Absy and I both did it. I said me and Absy, 12-year-old.
Yeah, I think Absy finished it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, dude, Banishers is one of those games that, for the most part, everybody who I've seen leapt into it they were hooked. And I'm also, here's another Helldivers. I also want to say I'm really happy to see Helldivers because there's a lot of people very burned on Helldivers' original release, and it's clawed its way back up. It's got everything sort of solidified. Pal World is the same way. They had a couple small issues at starting, but they seem to have got back up, and a lot of people really did like that. I just wanted to say, skipping over my Banishers answer because nobody got into it. Banishers is good, man. Joseph says Banishers is a banger. That's a good game. Good question. We do have a question from Cloudcutter, debating whether to buy an OLED Switch or wait until Switch 2 is announced. So, does he buy an OLED Switch now, or does he wait for a 2?
I'm assuming he doesn't already have a Switch.
Doesn't have either one.
Would be like, personally, I would wait. I think that
Agreed.
if unless you have a specific exclusive game you really, really want to play, and even then, let's be honest, for one game, we always advise people that, don't buy a system for one game.
Right.
Pretty much for the value. So I would say if you can, yeah, for sure, wait.
I think with
and see what happens.
Switch 2, every indication is backwards compatibility. I mean,
Yes.
It's like, wait until it's announced. If it doesn't, when Switch 2 comes out, some of these systems will be on sale and you can get it cheaper. But I would say if you haven't got a Switch yet, right, you've been able to wait this long, might as well wait a couple more months until we find out about
You've
the
been
Switch
all right
2.
until now.
Yeah. It's like, this illness hasn't killed you yet, so you can stick around, sort of wait. But no, it is one of those systems that is, Switch is great. It's got some great games, but I think it makes better sense to sit back. Next thing I want to talk about, and I think that this is, I don't know if this is unknown news. It isn't unknown. It's known now, but I mean, I don't know if people expected this, but did you see that Larian Studios said they are absolutely 100% not doing Baldur's Gate 4? And that they are moving to Future, I guess? Did you see this?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Did
so
they say what it is that they would do? Like Divinity? Okay.
No. But I'm reading this. So it says they're done with 3, but they're not working on 4. And then it looks like somebody else had told me they said also something. I could be wrong, so if anybody in chat knows if he said this or if people are guessing that it's futuristic, but they did say regardless, they're done completely with, they're not going Baldur's Gate 4 at all. Does that bother you as a big fan of Baldur's Gate? Or
I think I'm more a fan of Larian than I am of, because I didn't play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. So I have a hard time saying I'm a Baldur's Gate fan. I really liked Baldur's Gate, and I think the story was actually a lot better than, for example, Divinity, Original Sin 2.
Yeah.
I played the entire game, and I loved it, Original Sin 2, but I think the tone is darker, it's more interesting, right? With the whole thing with the cephalopods, it's awesome. And the fiction, I mean, just the starting cinematic where there's like, it features a dragon and a full-on cephalopod. Is that the right?
Yeah, you're talking about mind flayers?
The mind flayers, yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
no,
there
you
all right.
go. So that's a much more interesting mix of things for me than the super high fantasy from Divinity.
Dude, do you know what I want to see? You weren't in the podcast. I was telling Abzy, I want to see them take on XCOM. Go with XCOM, talk to those guys, call them up, be like, we're gonna rub RPG dirt all over your XCOM and try to figure out if you can do it with the characters that could die. And how do you do that? Like, how do you rub that much RPG onto it? Now, of course, I would love to see a cyberpunk futuristic one. Like and maybe that's where they're going. Some people said Shadowrun, but that's owned by IP, or that IP is mostly Microsoft, I believe now. Doesn't mean they won't mix with them. But the idea of an XCOM, man, where they're like, we're just going to, we're going to go straight up RPG in an XCOM would be insanity. I don't even know how they would do it. I don't care. I would like to see them attempt, I think with Baldur's Gate also, they've been working on it for many years. There comes a time where you're working on something, you're like, okay, we've seen it with a lot of devs where they're like, we've done a bunch of this world. We've done, they could also do Divinity Original Sin 3, but I would love to see them just jump, man, just completely jump.
Me too, because I think, there is a certain amount of burnout too, since these games are pretty close to each other. All the Divinity games are fairly close to what, Baldur's Gate was, even though there were some differences in tone and stuff. Like, I would actually like them to do something pretty fresh and have a crack at something for their sake, because it's healthy, isn't it, to challenge yourself. And maybe it doesn't pan out well, like Rise of the Ronin. They had a crack at something very different and sort of bit more than they could chew, it looks like, but still I applaud
so do I.
The balls,
see, that's the thing is there's this sort of mentality of they tried, they didn't hit it, oh god, they need to not try again. And it's like, even when I look at Rise of the Ronin and I see the way it is and the problems I've had with it, and it sounds like a lot of other people had, it's like, so they tried, it didn't work this time. It doesn't mean their very next game they try again and they fix some of the stuff that popped up, and now you're suddenly looking at a truly open world Neo game. It's like, dude, that'd be all, or we could just say a Rise of the Ronin 2. It doesn't have to be just exactly like Neo. When it comes to Baldur's Gate, as somebody we're saying that most likely it's also because of Wizards of the Coast. I don't know if you know all their issues, Johnny, but Wizards of the Coast owns D&D, and they have all kinds of problems, licensing problems, screwing people over, and all this stuff. So it's not too surprising that they just said we're done. It sucks because they've made money. Larian's made money. It's a very successful game, and if you can't figure that out, it reminds me of like you'd hear those basketball teams that were really good, but their star player leaves, and you find out they can't get along, and you're like, damn, that sucks. But that's in true. This case, I actually think it'll be good. Larian will be able to try something different. I mean, imagine sci-fi where, how in Divinity and Baldur's Gate you can mix and match spells. I mean, now we're seeing stratagems and Helldivers where you're sort of mixing and matching stratagems. Imagine in an XCOM RPG where, you have different weapons, different laser stuff. One character has some kind of reflector. He puts it up. You shoot that. It beams out instead of one laser into 4, hits 4 guys. Plus you have the RPG shit. It would be awesome, man. It would be really cool. I would love to see them go forward. Like that to me is sexy.
Cyberpunk was because Cyberpunk was its own
D&D world.
Playing, right? Like this own thing that they could follow. And I think is that licensed? Like, do you need to license?
Well, I mean, you need to license it from Mike Judge, I believe no, that doesn't sound right. But anyway, I think that's a cartoonist. I could be wrong. But it's his own thing, and he does license it out. We've seen, stuff in that area. Yeah. So I don't think that they would have too much of a problem for a cyber. I would be all for that, by the way.
That'd be interesting. Yeah.
Dude, truly just go with Cyberpunk Red or whatever their new one is and just say, You know, I think
Let's have a crack
Shadowrun
at this.
has less of a chance because it's Microsoft and they might want exclusive. I'm thinking about the exclusivity thing where I don't think Larian Studios wants to do that. But yes, Cyberpunk would be, dude, it might even allow for the RPG choices we wanted to see in Cyberpunk.
There you go.
You know? Yeah. Yeah, dude, I'm liking that idea now.
Role-playing.
Not only that, but all of this, you know, the skills you get in Cyberpunk that many are very good, but there were some missing because of it's a first-person shooter, graphics, FPS, all that, where you could put it in a turn-based, you know, climbing walls, chopping down build, you know, because you get a cyborg super powerful, you can do some crazy shit, man. Yeah, I'd be all for that. Less so a fantasy one. I think we can both agree. Like maybe less, we'd be less interested in a fantasy one. So, we got Jay Devil, who became a member. Remember, guys, if you become a member, you also get access to the Discord. After a little bit of time, you can jump in and hang out with us in Discord playing games. I think right now it's going to be Rise of the Ronin, Forbidden West, and Dragon's Dogma. Seems, just by looking, that Dragon's Dogma is definitely being streamed more. But if you want to jump in and stream, we would love to have you, or just chat with us. Next up, Miro409, $10 super chat. How's it going? Weird how people are shocked about MTX DLC Capcom has. Since the original Dogma, released a decade ago, every game has sold you useless crap. You can earn an hour into the game. True. But, again, we talked about this at the starting. There are those issues with some of those items being game-altering. Mike Judge is King of the Hill. Thank you. It's Mike Pawnsmith. That's why I stopped and said, I don't think Mike Judge is who I think he is. It's Mike Pawnsmith. Thank you very much. He's an awesome creator. Cyberpunk is a really cool world. You don't follow RPG pen and paper, obviously, Johnny, but there's like Sprawl Goons, which is a smaller Cyberpunk. A smaller creator has created his own little sort of like offshoot.
Spin-offs?
Sort of? Almost like how D&D has, fantasy there's everything from Willow to Legend to, it's just sort of bounce around. What about this? Dude, what about you capitalize on Dune and you make a Dune Larian RPG? Dune.
Yeah, I'm all over it, man. It's super deep. I mean, there's a lot of stuff
that would be crazy. I don't know if you would be able to play. Would that be one where the main character is such a big deal that you would almost like Lord of the Rings? Whenever you play Lord of the Rings game, you're like, I'm just a fake Gandalf. Gandalf's the coolest. I'm just a fake Aragorn. Maybe you'd be a fake Paul Atreides.
It would need to be a total like offshoot or like a side thing with totally different characters for that to work, I think.
Next up, I want to talk about this because I don't know if you saw this. So PS5, this is something Abzi and I talked about. PS5 leaks have gone out. The Pro leaks, the specs are correct. They've been verified. And this all happened, or much of it happened, because of they have a portal, a website area for developers to go to where they can get the newest data about stuff, and they can, it's sort of like I guess you would say, just like a member account on an MMO, but it's for the developers. And this got leaked, and it sounds like Sony is going dramatically after those leakers and trying to find out which company, might have leaked that data about the PS5 Pro. I would say, I don't know about you, but I always expect the tech stuff to get leaked. Like, I'm not too shocked that, it seems to me the tech stuff gets leaked before anything else. I don't know about you, but like we find out about AMD or Intel well before the chip actually ever comes out, or
or we see pictures.
Yeah, what did you think about the Pro specs? If you read up on any of them,
I'm just pulling it up because I didn't get a chance to actually see those.
So to give you an example of what it is, it looks so. Prior to the FPS discussion we've been having in the last 2 years, where 30 versus 60, and that's become predominant. This is much more GPU heavy. And it looks like it was probably identified as where they wanted to go when the resolution discussion was higher than the FPS discussion. Because if you look at it, Digital Foundries broke it down, we broke it down, that the idea of going from 30 to 60 is far less in most games with this system. It's much more about upscaling, resolution, effects, ray tracing being on a game. So you know how some games will say you can have 30 FPS with ray tracing or 60 without? With this one, if it was already able to get 60 without, they're saying with the Pro, there's a higher chance of doing 60 with ray tracing. You get my drift? So like adding an effect to an already established frame rate. Or Dragon's Dogma having a smoother frame rate maybe in its cities, but it's a slower CPU than what we're using.
So I'm seeing here almost twice the compute units for the GPU.
Yeah, it's all GPU heavy.
RDNA 3. Yeah.
Their own AI version of DLSS, not frame gen, at least so far, but for sure
because
a resolution
I see the CPU is fairly similar.
Yeah.
So it's mostly on that side.
So here's the other thing. I don't know about you, man. I'm not saying I'm happy with all resolutions in console games, obviously. For sure. There's definitely issues, quality on Final Fantasy, all that kind of stuff. But it is sort of unfortunate that it's not a little bit more on the CPU side and some FPS improvements. Because I think for a pro, I would much rather have them say, here you go, here's 60 FPS.
Yeah, so if I understand it correctly, the extra headroom in the GPU will really help with higher resolutions, right? So when
and ray tracing and effects. Yeah.
Yeah, so now people are trying to do 4K and native and all that.
Yeah.
I think that will be very noticeable. In terms of someone with a lower resolution wanting a higher frame rate, that I probably won't be as noticeable, right?
Or not on this system. It probably won't happen as much. I could see it smooth out some of the FPS variants that we see in games, like even with Dragon's Dogma and others where they say it's, what do they say? What's the new thing? Uncapped 30 or something? And you're like, what? Uncapped 30? Yeah. Which really just means...
What's that even mean?
We're hoping to be around 30? Yeah. Dude, there's a lot of... Yeah. Speaking of PR, whatever, there's some weird stuff, because you and I have talked about it, like locked 30...
Unlocked 30.
Locked 30 to me, if you're going to do it, is much better than an uncapped 30, because a lot of times you're going to get this. And I would rather have it be 30 with frame times, everything solid 30. I'm not saying I want 30. I'm just saying if you're going to do that. And you get the variable stuff. And, you have people say VRR monitors. I think you have a variable refresh rate monitor. That's all great, but that's also hinging on the gamer to have another upgrade on their side, another TV upgrade. Because I don't know if you remember, when HDR was becoming a big thing, a lot of the companies were doing HDR, and then they were doing a refresh rate difference, but they weren't doing VRR, because at the time, that wasn't... In PlayStation didn't even have access to VRR at all. Like, there wasn't even a version on the 5. So a lot of companies were saying, let's hit HDR, which, by the way, what a shitter. And then let's hit... a high refresh rate and low latency, and they skipped the VRR. Now more TVs are coming out with VRR, which is great, but I don't know. It's a weird one, dude. I don't know about you. Pros are hard for me to purchase. They're hard for me to dive into, because the jump is it's never generational in the way I would, sort of like. Did you get a Pro?
No, I never did, because I already had the original. So for me, I've never felt it worth buying like a second version of the same console, just a refresh or an upgrade or something like that. I want a next gen, for me to put money into it.
Yeah, I'm excited for it because I love tech, but I would say overall, pros just they're never really... I don't consider the X and S a Pro. They're series, but obviously the X is a good deal more powerful. You get the Scorpio. I don't know if you remember that. That was the Xbox Originals version, and that did pump up some stuff. But once we get to 4K, that's the other thing. I don't know about you, but I've seen an 8K display and I've seen a 4K display, and the difference is really, really small. It's much smaller than even 1440p to 4K at a noticeable range. Yeah, it's just because at that point you're getting so many, you're already at 4K getting pixel density that's really high, and then you jump to 8K and you're like, you're starting to get diminishing returns on TVs. And I don't know of anybody who's going to run out to buy an 8K TV. So the resolution side just doesn't seem to be as big hitting. Supertramp, $2 super chat says, let us add that AI has a heavy influence. Well, yeah, AI is the upscaling. So it's sort of a weird way to go, man. And frame gen being a thing with all these companies. I mean, if let's say we get 45 FPS normal and these companies start doing frame gen to 60, maybe that would be okay. It also depends on your latency, if it adds weird shit. But do you use frame gen when you play games?
No, because I don't have a 40 series. I have a 3090, so the best I can do is DLSS.
Or lossless scale, baby. That guy for $5 on Steam made his own version of frame gen. I hate people who have talent, man. I don't know how a guy sitting at his house made frame gen.
Because I haven't tried that.
Yes,
I wasn't
works.
sure if it was, reliable.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. A guy made it. Just made his own. And we're starting to see some modders mess around with VR and making their own version of sort of the alternating frames and getting VR frame rates higher. I think Luke Ross might be one who's done his own. It's just people at home, man. It's crazy. Yeah. It's nuts. It's at home. When I'm at home, I play with the dogs. I drink some pop and I read a book. And these guys are like, you know what? AMD and DLSS, yeah, they're locked to cards. I'm just going to make my own frame gen. You're like, Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah.
The amount of talent and GitHub, quick access to tech questions on Google help them, where maybe when I grew up, it wasn't such a big deal. But do you ever...
I think the mod space and that type of thing really shows that it's almost like a global selection where there's this one person in the entire planet who has the perfect overlap of skills.
Yep.
And the talent stack necessary to do this, that can go in there and do it single-handedly. And it's almost like, imagine if we did that for other things like who should be president or, some other important job.
Right.
Like that level of global selection where you pick the perfect person. I don't think we do it for anything else other than, this type of thing, which just happens organically. It's not that we're doing it, but it is, I think, an incredible phenomenon to look at.
Slap Shock just said something amazing. This reminds me of that team that fixed GTA 5 loading times. Yeah, that was absolutely nuts that a random person was like, hey, I'm going to mod the GTA loading times. And yeah, to me, I love it, man. I love when people are able, you get a person who, and by the way, you know this as well as I do, good Google use can help you. I mean, if you know have you ever done a wrong Google search and your answers are bad because your search wasn't good, right?
Yeah, have a good prompt for AI.
There we go. That's where I was going. Yeah. So you get these good prompts, you get these ways of people asking questions and saying, hey, how do I do this thing? And somebody's sitting at their house. Lossless scale, by the way, is on Steam, everybody. It's $5. It adds its own, he's written his own anti-aliasing as well, but he can also add FSR and DLSS into pretty much any. It's ridiculous. You should check it out.
I need to test this.
And it works on the Legion, so it works on handhelds. It requires a little fiddling there because Legion is portrait mode. But dude, there's something about a person who, like you just said, they have these overarching abilities, and it all comes together. And what the big companies, and this makes sense because the big companies are R&Ding. Like without the R&D from the big companies doing an FSR or DLSS frame gen, we wouldn't have somebody making it usually on their own. This is somebody who's just, or John Carmack. But building on that is it's incredible, man. It's incredible. It is a really awesome time to be alive when you see those kind of things. And I gave that guy $5, let me tell you.
I'm installing it right now. I'm going to try
it. When I saw it, I was like, and some games, it really does work insanely well. I've used it on Dragon's Dogma last night, actually, to see if it would smooth out some of the stuff in the city, which it did, because it's frame genning where currently frame gen is not in the main title or the main options in Dragon's Dogma. But dude, it's awesome that people do this. And then the companies look and are like, well, this guy did it for, so maybe we'll put it in our console or what have you. Yeah, it's just exciting. I want to add that Wonder Duck said, ACG, I mean, regular people are showing they can do more than AAA developers. Look at what Kingmakers is doing with 5 people and handling the amount of people on screen without bogging down. So I got to point out that while I think everything about Kingmakers looks like exactly what I want in a game, if you look at Kingmakers, it certainly does not look in many places like a AAA game. So there's one thing they're doing, but there are many places where that looks insanely ancient. So just want to point out.
I think that goes back, by the way, with what I was saying, that we take for granted a lot of stuff from AAA games.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of discount it, we take it for granted. Like, yeah, it looks pretty, but it's AAA. Like, yeah, we take it for granted, but, it takes a lot of work and manpower to create something.
Yeah,
like
for sure. Samba, $2 super chat. Have you heard Alpha Protocol's back on GOG? I did. Thank you for the super chat. And here's the thing I want to point out about Alpha Protocol. I don't know if that is anything other than the original version, which did have some bugs. So be aware that it is just, from what I understand, the generic version of that game, which is phenomenal, buggy, weird, and awesome all at the same time. It is definitely an enjoyable title. All Lights Out says, a universal mod released recently that can insert VR into any Unreal Engine 4 or 5 game. Yes, I've played that and used it on a couple games, and it actually works quite well. It requires some fiddling, which is unfortunate because the fiddling part is the part that some people are going to look at and be like, yeah, I don't want to fiddle with it. But if you want to play an older game, Unreal, or even a newer game in Unreal, mess it around. There's also a lot of people that even Vorpix, which isn't as good, but there are some games you can play in Vorpix which sort of add a pseudo VR layer. And some games didn't work bad in that. For the most part, it's more of a generic thing, and I know a lot of people have issues with it, but I played a couple games. Is there any game that's flat that you want to play in VR, Johnny? Is there any game? I know you don't love VR. Let's pretend you did.
I think I would want to play Cyberpunk in VR. There is a mod, right, for it in VR, but I haven't tested it myself.
Cyberpunk in VR is pretty crazy, but let me tell you, Johnny, talking about needing frame gen and all that stuff, Cyberpunk's still a heavy game, despite some great improvements. You're still pushing.
Yeah, I played it recently, man.
You're still pushing an incredibly heavy game around the game world.
Yeah.
If you can turn off ray tracing, you're gonna, that's a huge bonus.
I think with frame gen, that's where you can start looking at things like, VR, RTX. Because I played it recently, dude, and with a 3090, which is still a strong card.
Very strong card.
There's no way you're pushing RTX for a 4K monitor.
Yeah, unless you start messing with all those other things, which, is. Indio says, obviously Star Citizen, though it would be a nightmare outside of flying. Yeah, Star Citizen would be great in VR. I personally, I did Pacific Drive and messed around. I did Outer Worlds, the Obsidian Starfield-like, the RPG that came out a couple of years ago. I did that in VR, and that actually worked quite well. Quite well. Interestingly enough, I really haven't talked about it, but that was, I like that world.
For Pacific Drive, that's interesting because I haven't heard you talk about VR for that game. I
think it would be great
gimmicky?
in VR. No, it was gimmicky. I mean, it might be better now, but it was like, I think if I did that one, this is maybe 2 months ago, if I remember right, either that's in the new flat and it's an Unreal game, or I found somebody who had hacked it, maybe with Vorpix. I can't remember. It's been a while, but its environment, I love. So just sitting in the car and hearing the water was good enough. The rain, so good. Let's see. Craig says, Bloodborne 4K remaster, 60 FPS in VR. Well, that's for sure how to puke.
To VR? Can you imagine like rolling or like dashing in VR?
Man, I've played some third-person games in VR, and I got to tell you, they got to be perfecto, or they have issues. They got to make sure that camera is really steady, doesn't move around. Otherwise, you start going like, it starts making you sick. But yeah, VR is cool. All this kind of tech I'm excited for. GTA 5 in VR and console would be a dream. I played GTR 5 a bunch in VR with the hacks, and it works quite well. You had put down here, Johnny, Dragon's Dogma 2, and also how Final Fantasy VII keeps open world fresh. I know we talked about some of it, but was there any specific stuff that had popped up that we haven't discussed or that you want to hit on even harder for for
Yeah,
how
I
it felt
think
fresh?
there's something. There are a few things. So we talked about the keeping it fresh by adding a new traversal tool,
Mhm.
right? So every new region, and I don't know if you would consider like open region versus open world, because it is kind of secluded areas,
Mhm.
right? And even when it opens up, you're sort of fast traveling between the different areas. So I don't know like how anal people want to get about the definition, but I think that with every new region, there's something really unique, new to it. So that's intelligent, keeps it fresh. But I think there's something they did with like how you can visually parse the areas much better than other games, where you can identify stuff really well. So for example, let's just say you set in a particular direction and you see a tower, right, that you can unlock. Okay,
Mhm.
oh, that's okay, let's go there. And then as you go, you're finding out these things. Well, a bird is, showing me that there's something hidden here. There's a
Right.
little choco that's leading me to a hidden bus stop.
Mhm.
Okay, there's all these ways of like, showing you stuff that's
Right.
less obvious. But I found that a lot of the exploration could be done organically without looking at the map too. You could sort of take a direction and lose yourself for a while, and you're just going to find a bunch of stuff
Mhm.
because it's designed in that way. I thought that was interesting, that you don't necessarily need the map, or rather that you won't miss a ton of stuff if you're not looking at the map all
Right.
the time.
I think with Dragon's Dogma as well, Dragon's Dogma 2 is with the pawns having data about quests and leading you.
Yes.
Ghost of Tsushima has the wind, Tsushima. You've got all
Yeah.
these games that have these other elements that are interactive within the HUD that are their own parts of the HUD. So, for example, in Dragon's Dogma, with the characters calling things out, telling you where enemies are, I found myself never looking at the mini-map for enemies, never even, like, some games they'll show a red dot on a mini-map to tell you there's an enemy in that location or what have you. With any of these type of games, when they're good vocally or when they're good in just helping you out and understanding the game world, that's a huge step up, man. Ghost was a massive step up with just the wind. Really, when you look at it, just the wind. That was a massive step up in interacting with the game world. There were times where I just followed it sounds weird, but you just follow the wind. You're all, okay, I'm going to follow the wind. That'll get me there. Dragon's Dogma, you follow a pawn. And there's something about it where instead of a line in the sand saying, go here, which, by the way, I'm not going to say is terrible. I don't like it, but, it is what it is. There's something so awesome about a soft HUD that is in some way a graphical or sound element. And when you hear an enemy, or when you hear a pawn say there's an enemy nearby or whatever, it's something that's just, I don't find myself going left and right, lower left to look at my HUD. Instead, I'm looking at the world and finding that. Like you said with Final Fantasy, you're looking at the world. You're not constantly opening up a map that may take 10 seconds to open up because these stupid soft maps that are like, whoop, like a Ubisoft game. And instead, when they say something, you see the wind blowing or whatever, you're looking. And I honestly do feel that the world is, a lot of worlds are great looking, but with lines, people don't pick up on the great looking world or the inner or the, like Primal. When I turn the HUD off in Primal, the world itself sings, man. It's awesome. But if you have the HUD on and the quest markers on, you go from A to B.
You're looking at the marker all the time.
There's an infinite amount of spots between 1 and 2. And if you have the map on and it's telling you where to go, it is just 1 and 2. And you have to sort of force yourself to not do that.
And I've told you this, that whenever there's something in the center of the screen, that's what I'm looking at.
Right.
And I can't really help it. So like, that other game, No Rest for the Wicked, had the stamina bar bang on in the middle of the screen.
Yep.
I said that for me is distracting. I would like to look at the other stuff.
Right.
in a similar way, the markers, my problem with them is that they are usually, like,
They
by
are
definition,
the mountain, right? They are the
they
thing.
are in the center
Yep.
of your viewpoint at all times. That's why I even prefer something like Rebirth, where you can put a marker down and it will show in your compass, but at least it's up there.
Right.
So it's not in the, in the center of your view. Even that's better. But I think even better is, as you're saying, that the more organic. And for me, that's what I was saying about the pawns. That was sort of magic. It's like, hey, it's just organic. She knows about that location or about that quest giver, or, that's why she's telling me where to go, because she has had that. And I know this is the game lying to me, but at some level, it's just, it really works because it's just enough of a fiction for you to buy it.
Yep.
It's like, I get it. Like, it makes sense in my head that they have this information and I'm now following them instead of, like, having to find the way myself, which is really cool.
Another cool thing in Dragon's Dogma is when you're talking to some pawns, if they have levitate or they have an ability, and they'll be like, I can get up there, master, and they levitate up. And I was telling Abzi, it's like a dog fetching a bone. It's this awesome feeling of loyalty. So you'll be walking around and one of them would be like, oh, there's a chest. Let's see if we can get there. And there's something so, and by the way, this was replicated of all things in Fear, the shooter, Fear. The AI would make a choice and then yell out as if they were making that choice, even though the choice was already made. So it would fool the player into going, wow, the communication between this AI is incredible, but it was actually a very good lie. That kind of stuff is awesome. So when they're like, oh, there's a ladder. How do I get up this ladder? I know that they know how to get up the ladder. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. I know that this character knows there's a chest there, or maybe I see it and they see it. But when they say, I'll get up there, and the first time one of the characters like levitates up to a chest and you get a little gold, you're like, job well done, buddy. Job well done. It's awesome. It is that sort of high five kind of moment where, you have that team display in that game in particular. I also do feel that Ghost of Tsushima, while I loved it, the wind element got a little, I noticed that everything was blowing in that game. And so after a while, it became a little numbing, where there was, I like the foxes more than a lot of people, but I think that's because the fox became a distraction from the wind that was always moving the grass. And so when you'd have that, I know a lot of people are like, there's too many fox. Why is this fox leading me to a treasure?
Yeah, and it was a bit exaggerated, where it's almost like a zero gravity version of the world. Where
for sure.
Every pollen, every like atom it's just floating.
Yeah. And it happens in Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West, where I love the foliage and all that kind of stuff. I think it's great. But after a while, with everything blowing and electric pollen in the wind or what have you, you just start seeing all of this stuff. And after a while, your brain is a little bit numbed by it, to where that the traversal becomes a little bit harder, not harder to parse, but there are times where you start to play it and you're just like, this isn't necessarily for me. Like this, like it's a little too much. I still love those games. I still think that system needs to be used. And I mean, I think I would buy every game if it had wind. Like I think that's a huge bonus.
I think it's a great, like, incremental, even more than incremental. It's a big step towards the right direction. Yeah. But it still had some problems with being able to discern the direction of the wind clearly.
I noticed that as well. Yeah.
There's wind everywhere. And sometimes it's like, wait, is that the natural wind that's everywhere? Everything is floating. Or is it pointing me in that direction? Like, it's not clear.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And because if you'd go back and jump in, you'd see the wind blowing. And then you'd pop back in. And if the wind was like this, you're like, oh, I must be going this way because the wind's like this. And then it starts to jiggle normally. And like, wait, maybe I didn't set this up right. And maybe that's just the normal weather pattern.
The good thing, they were very smart about it. And if you did relax and not look at the map, because one temptation is, well, I can't discern the wind very clearly, I'm going to look at the map to double check where I'm going. Yeah. When you don't do that, it works really well, because then the wind will correct you. It will swing harder to show
Right.
you, no, you're going the wrong way, turn around, and then it's fine.
It's awesome in open world games when some of these devs are doing this kind of stuff, and I get why Division 1 and 2, somebody had brought up that it's a yellow line or you just follow the yellow line. I get that. One nice thing about Division, though, is that they built the tech into the HUD. It all looks futuristic. It's all got this, like, you're following a GPS, which makes sense in Division. It does make sense, whether I like it or not. The line, the holographs, all that kind of stuff is sort of future cyberpunky, a post-apocalyptic kind of thing, and I really do dig that. But a lot of those games have it where there's no reason, just a line in the ground or a golden path, and you're like,
Yeah.
really? Even Assassin's Creed, one of the things I do like about Red Dead 2 and Assassin's Creed has done it, but I do like when a horse can travel a road. You hold the button down and the horse is just like, okay, I'm going to travel the main thoroughfare.
Me too.
And then I find myself just sort of sitting back because I know I don't know.
You can look around.
Have you ever done this, though, where let's say that you need to take the fourth right on the main road. So what I'll do is have the horse run, and instead of looking at the minimap or anything, I'm just looking at the turnoffs. And I'm like, just sitting back, enjoying myself. And then I'm like, okay, third turnoff is the one I need to take. And I've missed them. I admit, there's been times where I've been in the wrong area because I took the next turnoff. Done that in real life,
It happens, but yeah, that's a really good feature. Just follow the road,
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. I do think that with the new tech, not new tech, but all the tech, we're going to start seeing this. Somebody who's bringing up Banishers has a lot of yellow. Horizon Forbidden West also has the yellow marks on the ground. And I don't know about you, but in Ragnarok, this caused me I noticed this in God of War. You'd climb up a cliff in God of War, and there would be these markings to indicate where to go. And you'd be like, who climbed up here to draw chalk on the wall? So there's probably other stuff that they can do, visual indicators. It'd be nice. I've turned it off, though, and died a lot in games. I think Shadow of the Tomb Raider, you could turn it off, and I leapt to my death quite a number of times where I thought I could grab onto something.
My gameplay of that game was legit a death compilation of
Shadow?
Lara,
Shadow in particular. Isn't that weird, man?
Because it allowed you to remove a lot of those cues, and I did, right? Which was fine. I didn't mind dying. I actually liked the freedom of that, but certainly I died a ton.
Wonder Duck says Alan Wake had a great way of doing it. When there was a secret ammo cache, you'd be running with your flashlight, and sometimes there'd be writing or spray painted on the containers or walls. Right. I mean, that's the fiction too, is that Alan's writing it, so it makes sort of sense that things are sketched. There's a lot of puzzle work. We were just talking about this last night in the Discord. There's a lot of people who brought up when I talked about games that gave them problems with their puzzles, and the highest was Alan Wake 2. By far. I mean,
some of those optionals.
Yeah, some of the optionals where everybody liked it. I don't think there was anybody there who was like, I don't like Alan Wake 2 because of the puzzles, but it brought the conversation of, I don't know if you remember much of Hellblade, but the conversation was around Hellblade 2 and how they're going to handle their puzzles. And then it went to Alan Wake 2, and it was like, I hope it's not just I hope it's sort of, they made some corrections from the original, but that it doesn't go like Alan Wake 2, where, man, there were some puzzles in Alan Wake 2 where I was just looking at it going, I'm really stupid, man. I can't.
Yeah, I thought the story ones were very,
well done,
accessible.
And
well done. There may be a couple where I didn't get what they were trying to say, but overall they were pretty good. The optionals got pretty crazy.
The Fate just said something, but I think he might not have heard us say it, but he says, just tell the wind to kick up on the touchpad, makes it super obvious. That's the entire problem that I had, was whenever I would do that, if the wind was already blowing super hard in the area, it would be hard you'd be trying to track that exact thing, and it would be difficult to do it.
Sometimes it was hard to see.
Yeah, it was just, again, I think it's numbness. I think when your brain starts seeing that movement, it starts to cancel it out after a while, or starts to sort of see it as a hush, almost like a little bit of sound in an audio recording, where after a while, unless you're really into that kind of stuff, you can probably ignore it. Bone says, the puzzles on Alan Wake 2 is the least of its problems. Woo! Damn.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's the least. I would say it has problems. Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the close camera, I didn't love the combat.
Really? Okay, so you would say with Alan Wake 2 there were more issues than maybe you expected?
No, I would say that's the one big issue I had with it was the combat, the closeness of the camera with it, and the dodge that continues to be bad.
Yeah, Alan, man. Alan just
the mobility is
he has some big problems with.
You need to check the.
Alan's got a back problem, man. Alan does not move, and either did Saga. They both were a little
flex your knees, man.
Get bend at the fucking knees.
Range
man.
of motion there.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see that with some games where you even get a character who's supposed to be super like athletic, and then you start running around with him. And you're like, dude, if you're this athletic, why can you not jump up over a rock ledge this big? Which, by the way, Final Fantasy had a couple times. Not a couple. Absolutely. I had a lot of this where the rock would be a small ledge and get to a bigger one, and if I didn't identify exactly the smaller one, I wouldn't be able to leap up, but I also wouldn't be able to walk over it. And you'd be like,
and at other times you're able to jump an entire wall. So it's really like
levitating up that wall, man. That guy he couldn't get up a little like small step, but if you got to an edge that was like 15 feet tall, that guy'd be like, I'm up.
No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I love that kind of stuff. What other stuff do we have for this week, man? It's been, I mean, other than the big games releasing, it hasn't been like a noisy week when it comes to game news. Game news has sort of been, I mean, the big stuff I think was the leak. I'm just popping this up and looking. Final Fantasy, the Rising Tide DLC. That's for 16, right? 16's DLC. Are you going back to Final Fantasy 16 to do the DLC?
I don't feel like playing more of that. It's kind of weird because I really liked it. Had some epic fights, but I just don't have it in me to.
Yeah, to return to it. Dude, speaking of this returning to, I don't know, we brought up your name yesterday. We were talking about Surge 2 and having to get past the spider boss to do the DLC. And then that brought up
killed me.
Yeah.
Oh.
But it brought up the Elden Ring DLC question. And I have a lot of people who are trying to figure out, do they replay Elden Ring or they try to jump into an older character? Or do they wait and just buy? I think you can like hit a button to sort of, get yourself up to that, almost like a WoW game where, you can level up and you can go directly. I don't know. I thought you could.
Mm-hmm.
But
because every other DLC that they have made has been you access it from a specific location in the world. Yeah. And thus you need to have access to that location.
Yeah.
And it's done with a good intention because they want you to be a certain level so that you're not going in and getting your ass kicked. Mm-hmm. So you're going in with a certain level more or less, which makes sense.
It makes sense, but it does bring up the question, like, do you get to that level by replaying?
Lot of people,
Yeah,
exactly. It's a tough one because if let's say you beat the game and you have a save like right there before the last boss, you're golden, right?
Right.
You pick up the game, you kind of remember the mechanics, and bam, you're into the DLC. However, a lot of people went into New Game Plus with their character. So now for them, it's like, I gotta now play until...
right.
I forget which boss it is. I think it's the horse boss in the desert, which is a little bit, right? You have to... It's not that bad, let's be real. Because also, if you're in New Game Plus, you're very overpowered.
Are you overpowered compared to the world in that one?
For the early bosses, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're going to be fine, but it's still
like
a bit of an annoyance. Yeah.
Especially when you look at some of these games like an Elden Ring, that I love the experience of Elden Ring and growth and power and the ability to challenge enemies I didn't think I would be able to take down with smarts or get roasted and not take down, what have you. I do wonder, like, when I look at that DLC, I'm like, okay, I got to get good, right? You've got to get good. You've got to get to the level to where that DLC is not smoking you. And I think they stated pretty clearly the DLC is still meant to, it is going to be super challenging. It is going to be challenging to experienced players. So you're like, okay, so I got to become an experienced player again. You know, I got to jump back into this, which I just don't know, man. I haven't decided yet how to, like, what exactly to do. Maybe, you know, maybe in the end it'll just be like watching other people's stuff and being like, you know, is it good or is it not? Elden Ring's a big game, and I think also jumping back into it, I probably wouldn't want to just what's the term? Like boss rush to that boss.
Yeah.
You know, and if I jumped into my character now, they're at a level and the enemies and all that stuff, you know, it's like, oh man, you know, these guys are badass. It's like an Assassin's Creed 60 level save game kind of thing.
I would say two things. One is, you know, people can download a save from the internet. So they could say, you know, let me just download this, you know, save of someone who is level whatever. And then you can respec that into whatever you want to make. And that basically would work around that problem. But I would also say, I think Elden Ring is a big muscle memory game. For anyone who, you know, played through the entire game, you've developed a lot of muscle memory, and it might surprise you. It's like playing the guitar or like riding a bike, you know, like you really fall back into your pathways, like your mental pathways.
I have a feeling you've been playing it, you know, and you dived into it longer than a lot of us, so maybe you're a little. I think
you're not giving yourself enough credit, because you gamed, dude. Like
I did well on Elden Ring. It was one of the best I've done on because of how it was set up. It was really nice, but I'm probably just remembering a couple of them, you know, a couple of the bosses where I was like, fuck, man. You know,
for sure,
like,
I think you're remembering the two bosses that like gave you trouble. Like every other boss,
other boss was cake in the amount of times, at least, you know, where you try to figure it out, or not cake, but certainly doable. Where dude, I don't know, man. I want to jump into it. I want to experience it, but I also feel like if I was trying to play Elden Ring, I would get a little bit of repetitiveness that maybe I don't want. I sort of like. So we talked about this in some games where I sort of like. One and done games, even if it's an RPG where for example, Baldur's Gate 3. We've talked about this. I'll never turn it back on, ever. I'm insanely happy with exactly what I got. I have no desire whatsoever to experience that again. I got exactly the playthrough I wanted, and that's great. It's amazing to me. It's like I don't know, something about that is actually almost cherished, where I'm like, I don't want to go in and adjust. I'm good with that. Elden Ring's a little close to that, dude. Elden Ring feels like there's a sense of wonder in Elden Ring that won't be repeated a second time. So if I do jump in to like get back to that point, I don't know if my brain will be able to handle some of the repetitiveness that might come from replaying. Yeah,
because we already know what to expect from, you know, the caves and like a lot, you know, we know the elevator, all this type of stuff is.
Yeah, speaking of, people were talking about Elden Ring and if they want to do it, but it looks like people are going to jump in, because I'd asked if they're going to do it. They're going to do the DLC, but then Cedric says I haven't even played Elden Ring. So
I think for a lot of people, it will be a good excuse to do like a second playthrough too, because maybe they feel like they half-assed it, or you know, like they kind of, you know. I don't know. Maybe they weren't happy with the way they played it, or the build they did, or something.
Or they were unlucky enough to play it when that first released with that first patch.
Yeah, I actually think that's what I would do. I would either not play it or set aside time enough to do like a full new playthrough and really get into it.
It's just that's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of time. I mean, what would that be like? You're talking. You know, if you add the DLC, I mean, you're talking probably well over 100 hours of setting aside time. And we work 40 hours a week, and we consider that a lot. Dude, you know, dude, it's like, all right, man, I'm going to set aside, you know, what is probably 3 weeks, if not 4 weeks, if you have a job, you know, and try to set aside that time. It's just it's a
hard sell for sure. You have to be really in the mood.
Craig was asking if a DLC can be Game of the Year. Not only yes, but I think we've now completely destroyed the idea of what awards are when you got Cyberpunk getting best ongoing game against games like No Man's Sky and stuff, which just doesn't even compute. And it doesn't compute even. There's even people who work at certain companies where it didn't compute, who may have, worked on those games. So it's like, okay, that didn't compute to anybody. I think once that happened, it depends on who you're talking about for the award. If we're talking about the game awards, anything can happen, and I don't think that should matter. If we're talking about you personally or your favorite YouTuber, that's going to be up to them. But I would say DLC is a game, and I don't have a problem with it winning. It would probably be really hard for a DLC to win versus good games in a year, because we're talking 2024. It'd be very difficult for me to say this DLC is game of the year versus, let's say, whatever, like a Pacific Drive. I'm not saying Pacific Drive would win.
I think also, unless it's a fully standalone experience, it would be hard to even think of it as something comparable to a game, because normally by definition they are extensions of the main game, and sometimes they become an integral part. Like we talk about XCOM 2 as intrinsically
War of the Chosen,
and not separate from that.
It's not.
That's just the best way to experience XCOM 2.
It's ridiculous. It is XCOM. War of the Chosen is XCOM 2. It's not like that. DLC is the game. Like it improves so much. It's ridiculous. We were also talking about all of these kind of games, and people were bringing up Atomic Heart because it's got DLC, but also, just so everybody knows, Dead Island 2 had their DLC I'm going to say a couple months, but I have a feeling my time is way off, and it's more than a couple months. They have a new DLC coming out as well, and so you wouldn't want to ignore those DLCs where they don't have the big resources of From. Also, personally, Johnny, I would say I would have loved for Elden Ring's DLC to have been at this time last year. I think that would have been a much better time frame. I think people would have been fresher, and it would have probably a poor time because I would have to look back at the release schedule. But I just think it's a year late for some people too. I'm not saying, I'm sure somebody's going to argue with me. I just feel like it is late for DLC. I mean,
it is pretty late.
A little bit late. I don't know if that's a From thing though, because I don't know if I've done a lot of From's DLC. I did some stuff for Dark Souls 3, I think. And I don't think it was 3 years later or whatever we are for Elden Ring. I think it was closer. But this is supposed to be big, right? This is supposed to be like
it's very big.
Yeah. What else do we have? Do we have anything else on our itinerary? It's been a tremendous week, man, for games. I'm going to do a bunch of Dragon's Dogma, but I'm going to do some Forbidden West, I think, today. I want to jump back into that.
There is the show I was talking to you about, the 3-body problem, that I highly recommend for people. That's one of my favorite sci-fi stories. I don't know if you ever got a chance to read the book.
I did. The book, yeah.
You did?
Yeah. The show's been, like I told you, because of the subtitles, was a little much. Yeah.
So it does start with a lot of subtitles. Later it kind of goes away, and that just becomes the odd flashback, which is nice because, like I was telling you, with Shogun, it's a bit tiring to, like a 1 hour and you're like full attention subtitles.
Dude, it's crazy in Shogun, man. It's like, for a good show, it's still
in Japanese. Like
it's that is a foreign film
it's a foreign film
in Netflix show
with the
style.
Odd English phrase.
So would you say with 3-body problem then, for people who are interested, ignore that the first episode is subtitle heavy, because you told me prior to the podcast that it's actually much less subtitle heavy after the first episode.
Because the way they present the story is they do very front-loaded with the backstory. So it's a lot of the backstory in the first episode, and everything after is much more about the present and sort of the consequences coming from that. You have the odd flashback to that time, but it's much more like it's a bit of a setup episode, which I think is unfortunate. I think the pacing of that first episode is a bit horrible, to be honest. It's just that I'm really into the story, so I kind of already knew where it was going. But I think for a lot of people, they will even be like, what's this even about after the first episode? Because it's not clear at all.
As somebody who has read the book, I can tell you straight up, that's even what I felt, and I read the book. Where I mean, I knew some of the stuff that was going on, but I was like, whoa. And as somebody who's read Altered Carbon and all of the sequels that guy's done, I felt the exact same way in number 2, the season 2 of Altered Carbon, where I was like, ooh, this is losing. It's losing its way a little. I still liked it, not as much as season 1, but I do see that with this one, a lot of people watching it and being like, oh man, like I don't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
But it's got a bunch of high ratings and stuff like that from people that, when I follow, I'm like, okay, this person likes what I like. But they got past that first episode, because I got into that first episode and I was like, okay. And when you have that many subtitles,
I've only seen the first 3, so I can't advocate for the full show. But so far, it's been very good. And the story itself is one of the most unique sci-fi stories that I have read, and I thought it was really cool, thought-provoking, and even in a way nowadays it's maybe more relevant than it was back then, because now there's so much talk about the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics and all this stuff that's much more like pop culture now, whereas back in the day only kind of like highbrow people or like people really into sci-fi would know about that. I think it's a cool moment for it.
I think when you and I talk about shows, it's funny because it mimics the same way I feel. Games and shows right now overlap in a weird way, where you get you get some shows that have some really serious issues, but they've got a good core, what have you. You get the shows that are you expect to be good and are terrible, the AAA, where you're like, oh my God, how did this fall apart? I've seen some terrible shows, Lord of the Rings, I'm looking at you. Some other ones that I'm just like, dude, what the fuck? These are horrendous. But then you get this one, which sort of, it's a little meandering. It's got some issues, like you said, with subtitles, but then it sort of cleans up, and it reminds me of Banishers, where it's it's got a heart somewhere. You might have to ignore, you might have to jump through a little bit of roughness to get to the part that, is incredible. And I found a lot of Netflix shows like that, or Hulu or what have you. Bodies was incredible. Bodies is a really fantastic show, but it is also weird enough that when I was first watching it, family members were like, I don't really get what's going on. I don't know if we talked about Bodies. Did you and I talk about that?
Yeah, I think only briefly. I did watch the season.
Yeah, so that was a different way of doing things. It wasn't the most tremendous thing, but they did something different, a little like an indie, or a B level
something
game,
fresh,
let's say.
A little bit.
AA game or something. But there's been, I definitely notice that when I'm watching a Netflix or when I'm watching, that I see a lot of similarities between video game industry kind of stuff or we get canceled games where you're like, this game, Star Wars, what was it? The Boba Fett game got canceled, right? And that'll happen. Amazon, they'll be working on something, be like, we canceled this. And you're like, damn, why? You look at all
sometimes a show that's doing well, they will cancel.
For sure. And you're just sitting there going, what was the math on this? David says, hey guys, been listening. Just want to say I really enjoyed them. Been listening for the last few weeks. Thank you very much, man. We appreciate it. We appreciate it. We'll be back on Wednesday and Friday of next week. Hopefully Wednesday. There's a lot of different games out for reviews and stuff, but I think we'll hit Wednesday. Wednesday was hard to hit the last 2 weeks because there's a lot of games, man. Luckily, we got them early, which is always nice.
Yeah, and you had 2 really big games back to back.
Well, yeah, and then Rise, which I'm still working on. You have Rise, you have Dragon's Dogma, you have Horizon, which I would have liked to have reviewed, but I didn't get a chance. And then there was Outcast, and
Rebirth.
So it's and Rebirth. Yeah, a lot of big games.
And you covered all of them actually.
Well, I covered, not in full review form, but yeah, dude, there's been some big games this year, right? Gamers, when it comes to, despite some issues, there's gamers are eating pretty good. Outcast turned out to be. It had some issues, but it turned out to be a really solid game.
Yeah.
The worst was Alpha's series got canceled. Yeah, I liked Alpha's was really enjoyable, Kig. A really, really enjoyable game or TV show. I like that. Travelers was also fantastic. I'm glad.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Travelers is primo. Yeah, and one of the guys in the Discord would not shut up about it. And the name sounds weird, I guess, maybe, or something. I was like, Travelers, it didn't really grab me. And then I looked and I saw one actor I knew. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a chance. And
sometimes that's all you need, isn't it? It's like, okay, like one...
I always do, Johnny. No, I always do. Yeah. I need an actor, the world, right? Cinematography can do it. Because I admit I was going to skip out on Blade Runner, the new one, because I just didn't... I was like, why? And then I saw the cinematography in Blade Runner, the new one, and I was like, oh, fuck, man, maybe I need to watch that. And I think I told you when that was on and I saw the first 3 minutes, I was like, fuck, everything's being paused. Like and that's so rare. But I was like, pause on my 15 MP3s. I was like, I'm going to watch this fucking movie. And holy shit. Like, yeah, I need one thing. Like what? That's why I'll go back to Three Body Problem, because I actually like the story. I can ignore I'll watch the first episode again, but I can ignore one episode filled with subtitles. I can just pay attention for that one time. You know how it is, though, subtitles, man. You start doing stuff around your house, or you're watching, but you even look away for a second, and you look back, and you're like, who are they talking about? What are they talking about? Who are they talking about? Gotta go back on this.
You missed like 2 lines.
Yeah. Sounds like cocaine. Well, I would say also with Shogun, I was that way, dude. I looked away. I was watching Shogun, man. I'm not lying. The dogs barked at the door. It had to have been 20 seconds. And I was like, shut up, guys. And I looked back, and they're talking about a different...
Immediately lost.
It was like I was watching another show. They were talking about a different character. It was 2 different people. And I was all, oh, crap. Like, what do I do? Yeah. Let's see. Anybody have any questions before we wrap it up? We're at... What are we at? 3 hours. I'll let Almost Johnny get out of here and play some vids. What else are we going to be playing? What else is news? I did some Starfield mods, messed around with Call the Ship Back to You mod, which should really be in the game. It really does help the feeling of traversal in that game. That was cool. I like to see, I've seen they've got a ton of mods, so it'd be cool to see what they fixed prior to the DLC. So I think the DLC is going to be fascinating to see what they put in the game and how they go about sort of meeting people halfway to what they want versus what that engine can do. So that's going to be cool. Have you been messing around with any mods or any, like?
Not really. No.
Not really.
I like to always do vanilla first and then mods for like a second playthrough.
In a weird way, that's why I love reviewing, because you would never do mods. So it's just like, it's like, this is it,
you have
unadulterated.
To do like normal.
Yeah. And then from that point on, if something bothers you, you're like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and hit this. Kevin says, ACG, how do you feel about Epic Fantasy? Have you read Stormlight Archive? I have. Epic Fantasy, I love if it's done well, but there's not a lot of done well Epic Fantasy right now for me. Lord of the Rings, I didn't like. Willow was terrible. Whew. Whew, man, did you do Willow, Johnny? Oh, Johnny froze. Look at that, guys. Johnny froze. He's in place. I could draw on the screen right now. John, look at him. He's like, what are you talking about right now, KARAK? You can see the evil in his eyes. That's a good picture, though. That's the Johnny playing maybe a Elden Ring, but having an issue getting past a boss phase. That's the look on his face right now. He's like, this is Johnny. You can't see the controller. I'm going to walk this narrative. Johnny playing Elden Ring. He can't get past a boss. This is prior to him quitting and crying. Oh, he's gone. Damn it. He's gone. Darn it. Oh, yeah. Dev Guy said it's actually Johnny playing Jasson. Lost was amazing. I like it. Yeah, Johnny left when I said I didn't like Lord of the Rings. He's out. He's had some PC issues. But anyway, I want to say thanks to everybody watching. You guys absolutely rock. It's been a fun time this week. We'll continue reporting on stuff. I hope we'll be back on Wednesday, as long as nothing big happens. Craig said, I'm worrying about Dragon's Dogma 2 file getting corrupted, but at least the game allows 2 different save files. You could also do what I do, use G Drive or any of your online or even your on-disk backup software and just run a backup of whatever save games you want to save. I do that with almost all games that I'm reviewing just in case. But luckily, I will say for so many hours in that game, I haven't had any issues. So I've been lucky with that when it comes to save games. The rest of you guys, I'll see you inside a chat. If you get a chance, check up on the Patreon. Become a member. If you don't want to, that's also fine. I appreciate everybody getting a chance to stop by, hanging out with us. Peace out.